John Norris, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Oh, Jay, great to be here. Thanks for having me, and I'm doing great. Good to see you, buddy.
This is episode number 300.
Wow.
This is quite a moment for us, and I couldn't think of anybody better to have on our show than you at number
Wow.
300. It's really an honor to have you on.
Well, I'm honored to be here, and that's a special kudos to you for getting to 300 episodes on this great podcast, brother. That is super cool, and I'm glad to be on that third century. That's pretty
Right,
neat.
right. Yeah, it's been it's been an interesting journey that we've been on with friends and guests of the show, and it's opened up all kinds of avenues for me and all my partners in crime here, and it's been it never ends. Like there's always a new opportunity. There's always somebody very interesting that we get to meet on the other side, and I never take it for granted. Like this is something we kind of created out of thin air, but man, it is so special.
Yeah, you built something great, brother. And I got to say thank you to you and for your listeners and viewers that may not know this, but you've done a phenomenal job of being our producer for our Warden's Watch and Thin Green Line podcasts that I co-host with retired Lieutenant Wayne Saunders out of New Hampshire. And, you make that thing a very professional podcast. We can't thank you enough. And, and in getting to know you as a producer of our podcast, I've started following Big Buck Registry and didn't even know you were out there before that, even though I've been a worldwide lifetime conservationist and hunt as much as I've been a game warden. And just to see your site and everybody sharing great deer stories and, images from their hunts all year long, that picks you up on even the worst down day anybody's going to have. So, I love the site. I'm promoting the site, and thanks for all you're doing for us and for conservation as a whole with our hunting community, buddy.
Very cool. I can see a nice buck over your right shoulder there, and I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
hearing some stories about that. And you've got some muleys down there over your left shoulder.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting concept. Sometimes you wonder if the warden you're talking to in the field is also a hunter based off of the questions that they ask. But
Right.
there's indisputable you're a hunter too. So you're our kind of guy for this show. I'm looking forward to getting into this.
Yeah, we've got some stories to share, man. It's going to be fun.
Definitely. Yep. So John, you wrote a very interesting book, and I want to get into the book in a second, called Hidden War. But before you got into writing books, you were a game warden. But before you're a game warden, you must have had some influences in your life that got you interested in that line of work. Not everybody I know gets interested in that profession. How did you get started?
Yeah, it's an interesting story and an unconventional one, Jay. Unlike my colleagues that I went to the Fish and Wildlife Law Enforcement Academy with way back, I'm going to date myself, way back in 1992. I live in Montana now full time, where my family, the north side of the family, has been for 40 years. But I was a California resident growing up and a California Fish and Wildlife officer, a game warden, and later a lieutenant. Did the whole patrol stint of everything that patrol entails, to big game enforcement, angling enforcement, commercial wildlife sales, undercover buy bus, marine patrol, and then eventually what we're going to talk about with Hidden War, building the first special operations team of snipers and operators and highly advanced canines, all from a game warden team in California to fight the drug cartels out of Mexico for some heinous wildlife crimes. But I don't want to jump too far ahead. It all started just with loving wildlife, being an angler and a hunter and conservationist, from my dad, my uncles, my granddad. We're multiple generations, handing down, the ethos of diehard conservationists and just loving the outdoors on all levels and wildlife on all levels. So I was hunting and fishing at 9 years old. When I passed my hunter safety test, I was waterfowl hunting right after that. And then when I was of age, 12, 13, 14 years old, I was starting to go on my first deer hunts. And unlike all of my colleagues that I was in the Fish and Game Academy with in 1992 that had met a game warden at some point in their hunting exposure or career, if you will, I never met a game warden from the time I started hunting at 9 years old until I was well on my way in college in an engineering degree major to be an engineer. I was going to be a civil engineer, possibly thinking about going to the military special forces under an ROTC program and studying engineering at the same time, when I finally met a game warden in the backcountry of Henry Coast State Park, the second largest state park in California, where literally I learned it my first backpacking experience, and learned to see big blacktail trophy deer, all that as I was growing up. And by the good graces, I ran into a game warden that was patrolling deep in the winter. We were on a winter break in the middle of our Christmas break between semesters at San Jose State University. And my brother Outlaw and one of my best friends in second grade, and also a race teammate on our Ironman racing team down in Baja, Mexico. We had a pack horse. We were doing a 7-day trip in Co Park in the middle of winter, which nobody does. So there was nobody in 100,000 acres of park. The Rangers thought we were crazy, dumb kids. They were right. We were crazy, dumb kids. We didn't have the good high-tech waterproof gear that's out now,
Right.
all these good sponsor brands, you and I are lucky to run with. So we had a horse camp 13 miles into the backcountry, soaking wet, our clothes, our tents, our sleeping bags. So we created a fire to dry everything out and warm up. And then here comes a game warden in 4-wheel drive, compound low in his green truck, working down to us. And I thought he was a park ranger associated with the state park we were in. Well, it turned out to be a game warden that was out there patrolling for late season, deep rut, after season, blacktail deer poaching,
Okay.
because that was an area that got poached quite often because the genetics were so good for big bucks in that area. And it was such a remote park that nobody got into, that if they could get into the park and slip in undetected, good chance they would get out with a trophy buck or spotlight a trophy buck, way out of season, deep in the rut, when they're really dumb and easy to get to. This game warden realized we were just dumb college kids, ill-equipped. But I stopped him when he realized we weren't a poaching threat and he was about to leave. And I started, Q&Aing him on what he was doing, because I was blown away. And so 2 hours later, he's finally leaving and going back on patrol. And Jeff, my partner, looked at me and he saw my eyes. He goes, "Dude, what is going on? You are just like fired up. I see this energy in you." I said, "That's my job. I am doing the wrong thing in school. That's what I need to do. When we get out of this hike, I need to fix this. I need to fix this problem." And no kidding, Jay, 7 days later, well, I still had 4 weeks before the next semester. We were on a 5-week winter break. I drove straight to the criminal justice advisor's office at San Jose State and talked to them about what degree I needed to get into fish and wildlife and be a game warden, be a law enforcement officer for wildlife. And it was a great program. It happened to be one of the best in the country. I didn't lose any classes. I was only a semester or two into the engineering program. So I changed majors. 3 weeks later, I was in a criminal justice program, and it was off to the races, and I never looked back.
Wow.
And that was late 1986. And in 1992, I was finally picked up and hired when I was working on my graduate degree, kind of waiting for a hiring freeze to lift in California so I could have a shot at being a game warden. I was very blessed it happened
Gotcha.
back in 92. Yeah.
That's cool, man. That's sometimes we have those aha moments in life and you just
Yep.
know. You know that that's the right thing you got to go do.
Yeah.
That's it sounds like you had one of those moments.
Well, and I think I was really lucky and blessed, because had I not run into Henry, the name of the game warden at the time that I met, you and I probably, well, I'm sure we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
Right.
It just, there was some divine intervention, something for us to meet so far in the remote area, in an area and a time of the year that just doesn't get any traffic back there. Wardens don't normally patrol then, for sure. It was a fluke thing, and people don't backpack in that time that far back. So
Right.
I feel really lucky, brother, that it worked out the way it
Yep.
did. And
Yep.
it was definitely the right calling. And I've never,
Yep.
it's been an amazing journey for
Yep.
sure.
Just a side note, and I'm always trying to figure this out, and I can't really put my finger on it. Maybe you have a little more insight, having a criminal justice background. I never equate the poacher with the hunter. Sometimes they look and smell a lot like the hunter, but to me, my hunting community is not the poaching community at all.
Right.
But boy, they sure look like us sometimes. And that confuses that middle 80%. And
It does.
so how do you, or middle 60%, depending on what you're looking at for stats, what's the psychology behind a poacher that needs to go kill a trophy buck in the middle of nowhere to bring home? And I mean, what's the goal there? I never understood why you needed to kill out of season or had to killed outside of the rules. These are creatures that are almost defenseless against the good hunters. So why do you have to even expose that? What's the psychology? Any idea?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because we just had Barry Kirch, the drummer for the multi-platinum rock band Shinedown, on our Thin Green Line podcast just an hour ago. He asked the exact same question. He's also a diehard conservationist and hunts and field a table for his family, but he was asking me and Wayne Saunders, my co-host on that show. He goes, "Guys, I just don't get it. I mean, these guys are like serial killers. Who would want to go out and kill too many animals? How could they possibly thrive or be rewarded by that? And how could they feel good with themselves of doing such a thing, knowing how much, true conservationists and hunters, not poachers, and you said it beautifully, Jay, love our wildlife. And, there's a big distinction. And you're right. The way the media, with media spin, with television, hunters and poachers are sometimes synonymous. And sometimes we get into the fact that if you kill deer, even ethically, legally, to feed your family, and you're kicking back into the conservation program, and you're actually helping the deer herd, that message doesn't always get conveyed, as you know. So we are really careful as game wardens, and when we teach conservation, hunters are ethical stewards of wildlife. Poachers are criminals,
Right.
and they are killers, murderers, and I know that sounds kind of harsh and judgmental, but I'm going to call a spade because fortunately they are a very, very tiny percentage of any of the folks out there that are harvesting wildlife, killing wildlife for legitimate reasons. The mindset, from what I've seen in my career, brother, has been the guys that are chronic. It's an addiction. It's like an addiction, like alcoholism, a drug addiction, gambling, food, whatever. I've had the craziest poaching stories of guys I've had to, come into contact with, make cases against, that they could be everything from a methamphetamine addict that's got a huge criminal history of doing aggressive felonies. And now he's just out killing everything, not to eat it, but he's actually killing animals to sell the meat for drugs.
Right.
We actually had an episode of Wild Justice, one of the, our Game Warden reality show that started the whole kick of Game Warden shows in California through National Geographic's Wild Justice. We did 3 seasons of that. And in the very first season, I was involved. Our squad got involved in one of those cases that the film crews happened to be with us. And that did 2 things. There were some negative and positives from that experience. One, it showed the dark side of poaching for all the wrong reasons, and all these dead deer this guy was killing to sell the meat commercially on the black market illegally to get money for meth. But then it made hunters look like meth addicts that are killing relentlessly and recklessly, and the separation wasn't really clear. And pretty soon the general public that weren't like you and I, come from a conservation background, or any of our fellow big buck registry listeners and viewers and participants, every hunter now was suddenly that guy. And so hunting was a bad thing. And we had to really tell some different stories and work with the producers to twist that narrative, because California, right, wrong, or indifferent politically, is still a conservation state. We still have a ton of resource. We have a ton of good hunting out there still. I still hunt as an out-of-state non-resident now, back in my old home area. So that's the thing. And it was that type of thing. But that particular felon, and then these sociopathic, serial killers that go out because they're so addicted to doing it and they get a thrill out of it, which is psychotic. It's dark. Barry, Wayne, and I just talked about, it sounds like borderline serial killers. And I go, well, the mentality is the same. And I think if you escalate and desensitize, when you follow that type of psychology of serial murderers, they always start with wildlife or with small animals. There's always this history that I did get to study in criminal justice in my program, of the mindset of a serial murderer and a mass murderer. And it always starts with getting thrills from killing animals, whether it's house cats and dogs, or now it's deer, it's frogs, it's, whatever the case may be. So yeah, there's a big difference, brother, but there is an element of serial animal killers out there that are diehard poachers. They're wrecking our wildlife species nationally. And it's the thin green line of conservation officers and yourself and our listeners that are out there as stewards of wildlife that are the force multiplier. It's not just the game wardens making the cases. It's all of our hunters and anglers and conservationists out there that are seeing this stuff go on, and making that phone call, because guys like Wayne and I, we can't possibly make a case without help.
Right.
Our best poaching cases where we actually stop the problem from happening are when your viewers and your listeners literally see something out there because they're so outraged by the atrocity of the poaching crime that they the 1-800 turn in a poacher number, they make that call, and we couldn't be effective without it, and we're grateful.
Yeah. I think when you encounter a poacher or you hear of a poaching scenario as a hunter, it's got to infuriate you beyond just somebody that doesn't hunt. Like, I'm sure they're akin to it, and it doesn't make them happy, but a hunter, it makes you furious because you work so hard to do the right thing, to follow the rules, and to send the right message if you're thinking about this kind of stuff to the people that matter in between, when votes matter and legislation matters. That just, and there isn't, I'm not really an angry guy. I'm typically pretty happy-go-lucky and get along. But that is one thing that fires me up, and I really think that might be one of the reasons I started this show in the very first place, was because that was it hit a nerve every time I heard of a poaching case going on. It really drove me insane.
Yeah, no, I share it with you, and I'm glad you're as passionate about it as you are, because like I said, our mutual colleagues, your listeners, all those conservationists that contribute pictures or that are part of subscribing to the Big Buck Registry, there are stewards of wildlife, brother. They are the stewards of wildlife. They are the thin green line part of it, holding back the tide. And without us out there doing what we do, without being in the field as hunters and anglers, it would run amok. We already know that through COVID, with all the shutdowns, I know we're going to talk about the cartel threats in America that Hidden War gets into, and the latter part of my career in that fight that's still going on in a little bit. But up until that point, we're still looking at massive impacts to wildlife species now, because there's so few law enforcement presence, patrol officers, and in some cases hunters, where seasons have been shut down because of COVID. Patrol restrictions are on because of exposure to, this pandemic virus, this COVID-19.
Yep.
So little things like that we've just are so recent, and it's timely that we're talking about this and doing the podcast now, have made it an even harder impact on our wildlife resources through this pandemic, because there's less enforcement. There's a lot of restrictions, and poachers feed off that chaos, just like the cartels do in America. They feed off of disruption and chaos, where we're all tied up doing other things for immediate survival needs, and now the woods are open season.
Right.
And we've noticed that, and I speak with my colleagues in California, not only my old teammates on the Special Operations Marijuana Enforcement Team front, but also the patrol wardens, and they're underwater. The stories I'm hearing from 2020 in California for clandestine trespass marijuana grows being done by the cartels, to deer poaching cases and wildlife trafficking cases, off the freaking hook. Because these guys see an opportunity for a thrill, they see profit in it, and they end up decimating species.
Right.
And it's horrible to see, and we need the help.
All right, let's get into that in just a little bit too, and go to do a deeper dive. So you're in retirement now, right?
Sorta.
Yeah. I mean,
phase two, I like to call it. Yeah.
Yeah. Phase two, you spent a career as a game warden, and
Right.
this is in retirement. You wrote a book called Hidden War, and I have dissected the book. I've listened to it numerous times on my walks. It's a fascinating deep dive into your career and the people that were around you, and you talk about some global issues too, about this even goes into politics in a lot of ways.
It unfortunately has to. Yeah.
Right. It unfortunately has to. But you've opened my eyes to something I didn't even connect. I didn't know that as a game warden, and then the game wardens I know in New Hampshire, certainly they've busted some illegal growing scenarios in New Hampshire. I've seen it. There was orange bucket case a while back where they kept finding marijuana plants growing in the woods of New Hampshire in a Home Depot buckets for some reason. I don't know why they chose the orange bucket, but if I was gonna grow marijuana in the middle of nowhere, I certainly wouldn't put it in an orange bucket. It just seems kind of silly. So they're not very sophisticated criminals.
Sure.
But as a game warden, the types of missions that you were on, the types of things that you uncovered and opened your eyes to a much larger problem that you eloquently describe in the book. It just doesn't seem like, as you entered into this profession, that this was anything you'd ever encounter, anything that you'd ever just think that was even connected to poaching to drug cartels. How that doesn't connect usually. So what's the premise of the book? What made you decide to write the book, and what is it overall about?
Yeah, you hit it on the head when you talked about it's such an unconventional type of work that generally from a public perception, or even from being a hunter, you don't think of game wardens fighting the drug cartels, tacked out as a special operations paramilitary type SWAT unit with advanced canines and sniper teams and, air assets like helicopters. But that's essentially what the book is about and what we morphed into. And to go back to what you just said, in 1992, when I was in that Fish and Wildlife Academy and that young, 21-year-old cadet, I wanted to bust deer, guys spotlighting deer at night, taking deer out of season, guys gill netting fish, the traditional stuff. I wanted to stop poaching because I loved hunting and fishing so much.
Right.
I never in a million years, Jay, imagined that I would be, supervising a tactical or building and co-founding and developing the first tactical unit of its type of game wardens in the country, really, to where that's all we did as a dedicated force. So what the book is about, and the reason we named it, it's called Hidden War: How Special Operations Game Wardens Are Reclaiming America's Wildland from the Drug Cartels. We named it Hidden War because your response is exactly what the public in general, and even our wildlife aficionados, our conservationists that are out there hunting all the time, have no idea it's going on. My first book, War in the Woods, was written a decade before, while I was still operational. And that book, there was a great publishing opportunity. My chief bought off on it. Nancy Foley was our chief at the time and was actually starting to let us start to work and encourage us to work with sheriff's departments and other allied law enforcement agencies on these cartel grows, because, and we're talking way back in 2010, in 2004, 2005, early 2000s, when we started to see this problem on the West Coast. And 10 years later, I write a second book about a tactical unit that's been doing it. We showed this on Wild Justice, on a worldwide #1 hit Game Warden reality show, Wild Justice. In 3 seasons, those of us that were doing this type of work with allied agencies were highlighted episodes. And so this message was going everywhere, yet it was amazing how little attention it got outside of TV, news profile pieces that I'd talk about for press when I was still operational, and then the book. And Hidden War is a perfect name for the book because this is happening right under Americans' noses in every state, not just in California where I came from. We have cartels embedded throughout America that once they're here, unless they're deported as deportable felons, and we're not talking about legitimate immigration, and we don't get too political on this. It's really kind of a black and white issue. This is not legitimate immigration. This is deportable, hardened criminal felons from south of the border that are part of cartel cells many are on international watch lists for having multiple felonies, weapons charges, narcotic trafficking, murder, aggressive assaults, very, very, evil, dangerous individuals that are embedded throughout America, a lot in California for growing black market cannabis. And when this stuff is grown, Jay, as I talk about in the book, as you're familiar with, they're bringing in EPA banned chemicals and pesticides and insecticides that are so toxic and so deadly to people, to wildlife, waterways, and to just habitat that they were banned by the EPA over 20 years ago from being used in our country on our agricultural products. So it gets smuggled from Mexico, where they can still buy it down there, brought into the country with their tier 1 growers. And, this stuff is everywhere. It's in the soil, it's in the waterways, it's on the flower and the bud material on the cannabis. that's dried and then distributed all over the black market for unsuspecting cannabis users buying off the black market. Some of this stuff is actually making it into dispensaries unknowingly. So in a regulated state that has legitimate cannabis, like my old state of California, you know, you have a percentage of growers that are trying to do things 100% legal, organically pure. They're not stealing water. The last thing they want to do is have poison on their weed that's going out to medicinal patients. It's going out to recreational users where it's legal to do so, not only in California, but about 15 other states now. Yet they're getting this stuff on it, you know? And that's, it's not only a wildlife destroyer, this is a human and health safety issue for, you know, our consumers of cannabis all over the country. So I wrote the book to get this message out for the sake of the nation, not only for California, not only for game wardens, but to show the environmental impacts to what you and I and our listeners are so passionate about: our wildlife resources, our deer herds, our elk herds, our antelope, our turkey, our steelhead trout. Because no exaggeration, brother, 2 tablespoons of this poison that they put on that cannabis, if it gets into a little tributary creek, and we want everybody to realize that these grows are in such remote areas most of the time, that they are sucking the water right where the headwaters of a nice stream starts. So not only are they stealing the water, but they're also putting these chemicals that leach back into that pristine stream that feeds bigger creeks, and then it feeds lakes, and then it feeds drinking water sources for cities. And 2 tablespoons of this stuff can literally kill 2 to 5 miles of a trout tributary stream, and every red-legged frog, yellow-legged frog, aquatic, every fish species in it, because it's so nasty. It's a nerve agent, it's anticoagulant. What it does to a big black bear, to a trophy mule deer, if it ingests just a couple droplets of this stuff in a grow site, it's a deadly nerve toxic reaction. They're frothing at the mouth. They die from the inside out. It's a horrible way for an animal to perish. And this stuff kills a lot of big game animals in grow sites all over the country.
That's crazy. So such a small amount can do so much damage.
Right? Yeah.
That's insane. What let's go to some of your missions. And your book is just loaded with these crazy adventures. I mean, just stuff
Right.
that you would, it's almost stuff that you would akin to Navy SEAL operations. I mean, these are things that you just don't associate with game wardens typically. You know, like you said, the traditional stuff, busting guys that are trying to shoot at mechanical deer on the side of the road, some of the stuff you'd see on TV occasionally, but this is deeper. This is hardcore. This is stuff I would say it really fits more military, DEA, special forces kind of stuff.
Right.
It's insane. Could you maybe go back to one of your early missions that might have given you an aha moment of what you were dealing with? When did you realize that, hey, this isn't just a poaching case. This is drug related, and this is way more damaging than anything we've seen before?
Yeah, it really started, Jay. 2004 was the first time in the Silicon Valley. I wasn't a lieutenant yet. I was a patrol warden in my old hometown area, South Silicon Valley, foothills where I grew up. And I remember it's the first chapter in the first book that goes into this, because this was the aha moment, as you say, very well said. Oh my gosh, we're not in Kansas
We're
anymore.
not in Kansas anymore, right?
We're not in Kansas anymore. We just walked into, we went into the upside down, like the kids say, right? With Stranger Things, because that's literally what we walked into. One of my best buddies growing up was at San Jose State as a fisheries biologist doing his master's thesis on steelhead trout, different species of frogs, and doing transect studies on vitality in an area very close to where I met that game warden on the edge of Coe Park. And he called me one day, and I want to say this was probably in April around our trout season opener. And I had been out all weekend working trout fishermen and, limits with kids and things like that. And he said, hey, John, I got a problem. I got 2 tributaries in my study area, and I've been studying this thing for 3 years now, and one is bone dry. And it shouldn't be dry in April. All the winter runoff, this thing should be ripping. I've got, little pieces of plastic, and it looks like, like black water pipe tubing in little chunks that's like drifted down from way upstream somewhere. And frogs and fish and everything they're dead. I got no water in this channel.
Okay.
I said, well, that's a huge problem. And I said, can you jump in the truck with me? We're going to go up. Let's find a jump off spot and let's dive into that canyon and find out where this block or diversion, this water diversion is happening. And he said, sure, of course. I mean, he knew the area like the back of his hand. And you know, Jay, we have a certain mindset of what we're going to expect based on experience as game wardens. And when I see a creek dried up, it tells me one of two things in the old traditional world: that the water's being diverted for agriculture illegally somewhere to another property. Maybe it's a water diversion to get water for a development of property or a build of some sort. And that's what I expected to see. And when we dove into that canyon, and it was, and brother, pristine, gorgeous. I mean, I've seen creeks. I mean, it rivaled creeks in the Grand Canyon when I've actually rafted and hiked the base of the Grand Canyon and some of those tributaries in the Silicon Valley. It was so gorgeous in this site. I'd never been in there my whole life, and I grew up right next to it. And we're hiking down, and we find where they're called check dams that the cartels build in these tributaries. And here's an earthen check dam of rocks and visqueen lined plastic to kind of encapsulate the water and make a dam, and a water line, and basically a tributary water line going out the bottom of the dam. And I didn't know it at the time, but there was like a orange type sheen in the water where the visqueen was, where the dam was. Unbeknownst to me, it was those furadan and metaphos and carbofuran, all those prohibited chemicals that had come in, because I hadn't seen a cartel grow yet. So, I'm kind of, spoiler alert, I don't know what I'm seeing, but I'm going to learn real quick. And so we tactically and very quietly went down that creek channel about 100 yards, following the black water line that was taking water somewhere. And now we start seeing 18-inch marijuana plants on both sides of the bank. We start seeing all this, manzanita and coyote brush and willow trees that are all good habitat that keep those banks nice and stable on the edge of that pristine creek, gone. So we have all this erosion. I automatically start thinking as a game warden, oh man, the first rain's going to hit that soil that doesn't have any root system or any vegetation on it. And boom, that's going to wash right into this tributary, knowing full well that tributary was a tributary to Coyote Creek, one of our last steelhead trout spawning channels left in the Bay Area. And I think most of our listeners know, and if they don't know, the steelhead trout is federally and state listed as an endangered species, and the federal, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service put their value at about $22,000 to $30,000 a fish because they're so impacted. So I had no idea they were poisoned and dead from this chemical. But jumping ahead, we go down and we see these plants, and then we see two growers, and they do not look like they belong in the woods. These guys are, definitely looked of Latin or South American descent. They're dressed in camouflage or the OD green BDUs.
Yep.
They've got AK-47s, they've got machetes, they've got handguns, and they're walking around tending their garden and changing water systems and trimming. But they're walking around in this thing tactically, like we would as law enforcement officers, even to the level of being, like you said, a SEAL team or a special operations small unit team. SWAT, if you will. And they were walking slowly. They were looking around with their head on a swivel, looking for anybody that might be coming into their grow. Their situational awareness was at a peak. They were watching their 6 o'clock, what we call the tail gunner position on our tactical unit. And I'm, leaning up against a cut bank, and these guys are 15, 20 yards from us. And I have an unarmed civilian buddy that, can handle himself in the woods, but that was an oh crap moment career wise. I have an AR-15 with my red dot, no radio coverage. I can't get out on a radio. There's no cell coverage. We are deep in a canyon. And if these guys keep coming close, we're going to have contact. There's no way to avoid it. And that might've been a career ender if it had gone the wrong way.
Right.
Quite honestly. But fortunately, we stayed hidden. They drifted away. They tended their plants and they went further up canyon. And we both, with those big pie-eyed of what did we just see, we hiked our, hightailed it out of there straight up a canyon back to the truck. And then my mind was spinning. Now I just saw the worst poaching criminal I'd ever been across. I saw the biggest environmental impact of any wildlife crime I'd ever encountered as a game warden, yet it wasn't something game wardens do. And I didn't know what to do. So it was call a narcotics task force, a local agent, bring all these agencies together. And as that's the Palisade Ridge chapter, the first chapter in War in the Woods, the first book, it goes into how we learned, kind of stumbling forward without having any resources of how we deal with these crimes. And we were part of a task force. We were the guides to get them into the area. We weren't really trusted at that point to have any enforcement knowledge of how to deal with these guys, what to do with the plants. So we kind of followed along, and we learned a lot on that mission. And a year later, the second chapter in the first book goes into, we're helping the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, their marijuana eradication team, their special ops unit dedicated to that. We had met on that first mission in 2004 that we had really been like-minded, and they were gracious enough to take us game wardens in as equals, as fellow conservationists. Because the cool part about the sheriff's guys that we were working with on that Met team, Jay, you know, they came from your neck of the woods. They were upstate. They were Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, the Midwest. They were all big deer hunters.
Yep.
They hated what they were seeing. Even though they weren't game wardens, they were conservationists. They were thin green liners. So we had that bond starting back in 2004, and now we're on one of their missions in our county, back in northern Santa Clara County, and we walk into an ambush during harvest time, and we're undermanned with a 6-man unit, and the whole mountainside was being harvested in probably 10 different grows. There were probably 20 to 30 cartel operatives up there. We got to just one, and we took one round of AK-47 SKS fire from a military round from that caliber, and it went right through my young warden partner's legs, penetrated both his legs. He had 4 holes. He went down. I ended up engaging one of the suspects. It may or may not have been the guy that shot him. We suspect it was. My partners on the sheriff's office were in a gunfight with their AR-15s on another gunman that was actually crouched down with a sawed-off shotgun pointed at me and another game warden at 7 yards through brush that we never saw. So had Snake, as he's codenamed, my partner from the sheriff's office, and Apache, Mike D'Amigo, who now since has passed away, sadly. Had they not engaged that suspect, I wouldn't be here having this talk with you.
Right.
No exaggeration on that. But when that all went down and we had an officer shot, and by the good graces, my partner survived. He almost didn't. He slipped into shock. He was incredible blood loss. We waited 3 hours to get an air rescue to get him out of there. So that was an eye opener, not only for us as game wardens, but for law enforcement agencies in general in the Bay Area. How do you have an evacuation plan for this type of mission? When did we get drug cartels in the Silicon Valley foothills of California, and unbeknownst to us in 25 other states all over the country embedded? You know, we had barely scratched the surface. But brother, the thing I knew that day, I knew it in 2004 when we helped that one agency with the first raid we found with my biologist. And I knew it when we got in that gunfight. I said, this has to stop. Right. This is the worst, most egregious wildlife criminal I've ever seen. They're not even here legally. They are definitely international criminals, and they're definitely more aggressive with less of a concern for human life and no concern for wildlife. It's there to be taken. Habitat is there to be destroyed for black market profits for the cartel. These guys are nasty. And I said, it's going to be a tough job. It's going to be a dangerous job, but there are game wardens that need to focus on this, just like these sheriff's deputies are. But we need to bring the environmental component to the game, because what was happening at the time, Jay, is these raid teams were going in, chopping all the plants down, maybe taking them out, maybe disposing of them on site, right? Maybe hardly catching anybody because nobody was getting funded for arrests. They were getting funded for plant count from the DEA and from our DCEP grant that comes federally every year to each agency. Thing that was so horrible about that is I'm going in and raiding with these agencies, and we're cutting plants and we're not catching anybody, and then we're helicoptering or hiking out. And I'm like, whoa, time out. The job's only halfway done. Look at that creek diversion, man. Look at those dead animals. Look at all this trash. Look at what is that pink stuff in a bottle? What's carbofuran in this container? You know, we're handling stuff that's like, you can't even handle it without nitrile gloves and an N95 respirator.
Right.
So that stuff was left in the woods as a Superfund site. So even though we got the criminal element out and the weed is destroyed, that stuff's still in the water. Winter comes, it just washes it further down. So the exponential effects on our deer habitat, our elk, our antelope, our big game, our small game, our upland game, it was exponentially horrendous, man. So that's when I started to informally get involved and do more and more. In fact, it got to a point where my immediate chain of command were kind of like, oh, great, you're helping the sheriffs again. You ever going to do real game warden work?
Right.
You're going to
Right.
go, go write a fishing ticket. You're going to do a deer case. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do a deer case. I'm going to stop this grow. And about 20 big trophy blacktail bucks are going to maybe live
Right.
because they're all killed and all poached in these grow sites. And something else on that, I know, I think I talked about this in the book. You may remember this, but the movie Predator. It's
Yeah.
one of I love the
Sure.
original especially.
Right.
And there were all these spin-offs of Predator, right? And as big game hunters, we kind of like the intergalactic Predator premise.
Totally.
It's just a great
It's
story.
one of my one of my
Yeah.
most favorite
One of your
movies. Yes.
favorites, right? I
Yeah.
love you, man. Yeah, I feel the same way. But you remember in some of the Predator scenes where when Arnold, or later I think it was Adrian Brody in Predators, where they had that hunting
Right.
crew and they had trophies hanging in camp.
Yep.
They had heads of animals, heads of people. Well, that's what some of these grow sites are like. We would walk into these grow sites, and here's all these, trees, that surround a plot of where the tainted marijuana is being grown. And there's, a 22-inch 4-point blacktail deer rack. And then here's another big Pacific fork that's a trophy by anybody's standards. It's just a massive, big, good mass, dark root beer horned, big old granddaddy swamp donkey Pacific fork, 4 or 5 trophies. And I'm like, wait a minute, something doesn't add up. These are cartel growers. How the heck are they getting all these damn trophy bucks when they're in here growing weed, making noise? This isn't, I spent 20 years trying to get a buck that good.
Right.
Doing it the right way.
Right.
And just enjoying the process. And a biologist told me about 10 years ago, she goes, you know what marijuana, when it buds and has that stink, it's catnip to deer.
Really?
So deer smell this stuff, and they're coming in from areas that aren't even their geographic regions. So like baiting in an area where it's illegal, think of what that's doing, Jay. It's bringing in an inordinate amount of these trophy genetics of these big bucks. And then these guys are using their pellet guns, so they don't make gunfire to be, heard. They're trying to stay stealthy and under the radar. So they're using high caliber pellet guns to kill these deer. They're parting them out for meat. Maybe they eat the meat, maybe they don't, because these deer are probably poisoned because they've drank water that's tainted with the toxic chemicals.
Right.
But then they skin out the head like, look, this deer is never going to touch my marijuana plant, and kind of a sick little trophy. And they'd be all around. And I'm looking at 4 deer, understanding the genetics and the biodiversity of deer herd management, and going, oh my gosh, this is deer from like a 10 square mile area, maybe larger. Why are there so many big bucks in the area? They all got sucked in from the catnip, the budded marijuana. Then they got killed. And that's not counting what the poison did to the other animals. So
Right.
I was seeing exponential levels of wildlife loss, not only immediately in the site, but pervasively going on for months, if not years, if we didn't do something. And needless to say, I knew at that point it had to be a specialty. But just politically and traditionally minded game warden mentality, we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it and have a specialized team of game wardens until the second book, until the 6 years that Hidden War goes into, from 2013 to when I retired at the end of 2018. It goes into, and you said it best, these crazy stories. I think I highlighted 2 of our 6 gunfights with cartel members, multiple canine, ambushes, the life saving of these dogs. You and I were dog guys, our hunters out there at the Big Buck Registry. We love our dogs.
Yep.
Working dogs, they're pets, they're police, law enforcement, military canines. And that's why we wrote the book, brother. We had to get that message out for the American public, especially our outdoor enthusiasts, to understand what is happening in our forests.
Yeah.
And the thing too to remember is, if you're not an outdoor enthusiast and you're never going to run into a cartel grow, and you're not worried about poison water, you don't really know deer herds, even if you have no concept of what's going on out there or don't see the joy in it, you still don't want to see poison water. You still don't want to see dead animals. Nobody wants to see an animal die poisoned that way. And we need to remember that these cartel groups are the same groups from the same cells, just doing different jobs. It's a business model of tainted cannabis production for the black market during the summer months in states that have a really good climate for growing outdoor marijuana, like California being one of 6 Mediterranean climates on the globe, and to a lesser extent, 27 other states all the way back to where you're at now. But these same cartels are making methamphetamine for the black market. They're making the synthetic heroin fentanyl that is so dirty and so erratically dosed and made so poorly that it's killing thousands of people in America. They're into the prescription narcotic lookalike pills we found out from Bill Bodner, the sack with DEA that was on our Thin Green Line podcast a while ago that you produced. This thing on human trafficking that's got so much attention finally, and the child sex exploitation and trafficking, same groups.
Right.
From Mexico, doing a multi-billion-dollar enterprise within our borders and running amok.
Yep.
So yeah, and we didn't know all this yet, but essentially that's what our team is fighting in Hidden War. Now we know the threat, and now we're doing it right. Gotcha. We're doing it with the right weaponry. We're doing it without any logistic red tape. We are, kind of, my SEAL buddies say, you guys are kind of like the SEAL Team 6 of game wardens from the standpoint of you don't work in any one sector. You go anywhere in the state you need to. You work it with anyone you need to. You have, a really good amount of resources, whether it's helicopter assets, vehicles, training time, weaponry, ammunition, great dogs, and great guys.
Right.
And it was a real oddball step for a game warden agency to do. And I'm really blessed that we were able to do it, and that we had the support of really good leaders like Nancy Foley and later Mike Carrion, one of my mentors and the chief that retired before I did, that if it hadn't been for Mike, the Hidden War story would never happen, because the team would have never been built.
Right.
And now we're helping other states do it. It's not so oddball anymore, because, like our military brothers fighting the war on terror overseas in the sandbox and other places throughout the globe, this is a domestic eco-terrorism war happening within borders, a little quieter, not quite as violent. You're not getting in as many gunfights and stuff, but it's no different. It's just affecting us a lot closer to home, and it's affecting our wildlife resources. So my SEAL team and Delta team buddies that I work at, we work in that circle in tactics and things. They look at this thing and they're outraged. They go, man, if I can get back in the game, become a reserve game warden, go back as a second career, whatever. And we've had guys do that. They've literally come in from special forces and leave the military and mainline forces and go, hey, I had no idea game wardens had that going on. And I have always been a hunter and a fisherman. I want to join a team like that. And when you're getting to that demographic of great Americans and very skilled, with a high set of skill sets, that's what we need. That's how we need to tackle it. And we're lucky that's happening.
Yeah. I can see how that's attractive to guys that might be coming in from military ops and say, oh man, this is right on my home turf. Let's go.
From going full speed like a Ferrari, and now they're hitting a wall and they're walking. It's
right.
They want to do. They want to keep going. Yeah.
What? I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around what inspires a drug cartel to cross the border, to grow on American soil, and do all this decimation. Is it because they decimated all the lands that they've already been on below the border, or I mean, what motivates them to come? And it seems like it'd be more dangerous for them to be on the soil than to stay on the other side of the border.
That's a great question that no one's asked. I'm glad you brought it up. And it's a three-pronged approach. They come across the border because they can, for one, and also because if they're really embedded and they're really good at what they do, the odds of them getting caught have gone up quite a bit since team like ours have developed and got more focused and just gotten better and not come in so, overwhelmed and kind of ignorant to the problem and how to handle it. But they oversaturate the market because they know they're going to lose grows. So for instance, in Mexico, they're still doing it and they're still growing in the central, the highlands of Michoacan and central Mexico, but the federales down there are attacking that very aggressively. And so if you're doing it down there, it's a little bit, looser there on rules of engagement restrictions and things like that when they're dealing with the federales or the Mexican National Guard.
Sure.
Because they attack it a lot harder because the cartels are so much more violent within their own groups and rival cartels in Mexico. There's a bigger risk to getting hurt, growing it down there if you are detected. And there's just a lot more violence associated with it. Once they slip up here, we do have the violence, but it's so far lesser scale because it's bad for their business to be fighting with each other and, you know, killing each other. We see that. We've seen shallow graves with rival gang members buried in groves before. We've seen, you know, dead growers show up for no apparent reason, and we know something nefarious happened along those lines. But when they know some of it's being interdicted in Mexico and not all of it's gonna make it up here, they start embedding here because they know they can get a good percentage of it on the black market before it's detected. And then they also come in, and I have a lot of pictures, as you know, in Hidden War in the hardcover. We have a lot of color and black and white pictures. I'm really grateful to Caribou Publishing, which is the book side of Gun Digest magazine and Recoil magazine and Recoil TV that my brand is part of. They wanted to make this a visual book as well as a story book and really get into not only the science, the action of the missions, the maps, the GPS, the tactics, but show what this stuff looks like. You know, what does a panga boat look like? The third way they bring, you know, tainted weed for the black market into America and methamphetamine and traffic people is they bring a one-way panga boat from Mexico all the way around, you know, the Sea of Cortez side, refuel it 100 plus miles off the San Diego coastline and drop these boats just in the surf at random spots up the California, Oregon, and Washington coastline, and have a crew waiting to take the load and take the boat navigators out, and they basically scuttle the boat. And that only started about 10 years ago, and it was very effective. About 21 of these panga boats, Jay, hit the west coastline every month, and maybe 3 to 5 are interdicted. So when every one of those panga boats has 3,000 to 6,000 pounds of processed, ready for sale, ready to consume tainted marijuana, and maybe some meth, maybe some fentanyl, and who knows what else. I mean, there's been links to, you know, terrorism infiltration through the cartels this way. And what a great way to get, you know, a terrorist cell into America, then put them on a panga boat that has a 90% chance of making it not only to the coastline, but of getting out into the American populace.
Right.
So we see these boats showing up. You know, not all of them make it for the cartels, but a percentage do. And when one boat costs them $300,000-$400,000 with the high horsepower 4-stroke motors and the construction to be gunmetal gray and blue to match the sea, to be hard to detect, they put a lot of money into these boats, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the profit.
Right.
You know, they're going to make 10, 11, $12 million of profit from one boatload of tainted weed, and the boat costs them $250,000. It's just it's an oil spill waiting to happen, floating there in the surf most of the time when we find them. So to your point, or to your question, that's why they're working within state, because they don't have to get into the border issue of it being interdicted at the border. They take that chance. Infrastructure is far easier to supply than trying to risk a lot of federale, you know, impacts down at the grow site itself if it's interdicted, but then smuggling so many hundreds and thousands of tons of tainted weed across the border, knowing a lot of it's going to get picked up.
Right.
So it's a 3-prong approach to maximize profit and maximize effectiveness.
So it sounds like they just took advantage of a place where our government wasn't looking. They're not looking over there. We'll just go over there. They found a weak spot. They found a shadow to kind of hang out in, without the risk. So the risk reward was much greater simply by coming across the border. That makes total sense. Wow. Yeah. Interesting. I wanted to kind of get into some of the characters in the book. You certainly have a bunch of them. And I don't know if we have time to get into all of them, but you had some great names, partners of yours that you've worked with. Just Apache, I think you mentioned it, just some fantastic code names. But the one that I really want to focus on is the fur missile.
Let's talk. All right.
You know, and I mean, dogs are so ingrained in hunting and hunting culture in all kinds of ways. And certainly, I mean, this is a man's best friend. Yeah. But when you have a partner that's there to help assist you, especially one that's well trained, and it sounded to me as you described, Phoebe, that without that dog, a lot of these things could have gone awry. And in fact, there was a time after Phoebe passed that you described a new dog that came in that didn't have the instincts yet that Phoebe had acquired. So there's a training process. Can you tell me some things about Phoebe and how a dog aided in taking out some of these grow sites?
Yeah, man, I could talk about that blessing Phoebe all day long, and I'm actually getting a little choked up right now thinking about her.
Yeah, it
You know,
dives deep, right?
yeah, and I appreciate that. You know, we lost her to leukemia the last year I was operational. It was 2018, and she made it to an amazing 13 years old before she died of that disease. Um, given the career she had, it was crazy. So to put it in perspective for our listeners, um, we had two levels of canines in our Department of Fish and Wildlife, and most agencies have similar, and military war dogs are similar to our dual purpose dogs. Sometimes they have to bite to kill, they have to bite to stop bombs, you know. So, you know, Taliban hunting dogs with the SEAL teams might be a little different than our apprehension dogs, but not much. Phoebe was a Belgian Malinois, female, awesome dog, the same breed that the SEAL teams and other special forces use, because they're very smart, and they're very good in multiple environments.
Mm.
And Brian Boyd, codename Rumble, you know, who
Right.
is my brother from another mother forever, one of my closest friends, and you know, he came over to Met right away when we built the team, and he's become the guru kind of canine trainer for our whole state, and really a mentor to a lot of other states all over the country and other agencies, because Brian had the passion and the energy. And when he got Phoebe, you know, you have that one in a million dog and one in a million handler that when they come together, magic happens. I call it the comet. You know, you just see that meteor shower, you see that shooting star, and
Mhm.
and I know that sounds kind of it's grand, but I can't understate that, because those two came together at a time when we were just starting to do this marijuana problem and integrate with agencies and fight the cartels. And the agencies that normally did that job when we didn't, like sheriff's departments, in Brian's case, Shasta County, they didn't have a dog that did that job. You know, yeah, they had canines in the city and they had canines in their rural deputies, but to get canines that could go on a 1, 2, 4, 8 mile hike in 90 plus degrees in the middle of summer, you know, and not overheat, not dehydrate, not, you know, freak out
Right.
with the elements, and still be able to bite and apprehend a very violent criminal that's probably going to try to hit him, going to try to stab him, going to try to do all this heinous canine, you know, anti-canine tactics, just to just get out of that thing, you know, successfully, was really hard. So Phoebe was by no means the perfect dog in the beginning. I mean, before I started working with Brian and she started getting into the cartel hunting game, you know, she had about 2 years of trial and error, just like Canine Champ, who you read about in Hidden War at the end. We were trying to retire Phoebe out, even though the vet still certified her as a working dog, and she was our best dog by hands down in the fleet, so to speak, of a very small fleet of dual purpose apprehension and detection canines. We were trying to just ease her out. She was already 11, 12 years old.
Yep.
You know, that's a couple years older than most canines doing her job ever make it anyway, but she just happened to be healthy enough to still do it miraculously. And because she was a star on Wild Justice, she was a big hit dog with all of our other dogs that were in our Game Warden reality show. So the country loved her. You know, other countries loved Phoebe from what they were seeing on TV. And to, you know, to have her in missions where she could get stabbed or shot or stomped on by an armed AK-47 armed cartel gunman in a grow site at 12 or 13 years old, that's not something you want to explain. It's not something we wanted to really have happen, but we just couldn't get other dogs up to that level fast enough. But by the time she retired, Jay, she had a record-breaking 116 apprehension bites in a career.
Mm.
And on top of that, she had 900 more arrests of armed cartel gunmen that gave up, that she didn't have to bite. So even when I talk to my SEAL buddies that are canine handlers that know what a war dog, you know, does and how aggressively they had to be at the peak of our war on terror overseas, they're blown away that a female canine Malinois in the state of California working for a game warden had that many bite apprehensions. It's
I
just,
gotcha.
the numbers are, and it's not really about numbers, but what that story says is, damn, there's a lot of real bad people out there doing this. If she bit 116 cartel gunmen, that who knows what other crimes they've committed outside of growing dope, poison cannabis in California. Had they murdered people? Had they killed people with narcotics? Had they trafficked kids? Had they done rapes? Murders? Who knows?
Right.
The answer to many of them is yes, because we know in researching criminal histories, we would catch them and bite them and deport them, and they'd be back, and we'd have criminal histories on some of these guys. So she did a lot of good. She really did a lot of good.
Yeah.
And you said it best when you started to say there were close calls that would have went a lot worse, and you guys might not have made it out safely if Phoebe hadn't been on station that day. And the second chapter in Hidden War, I go into that transition of when the light bulb went off, when Phoebe saved my life for the first time. And that was the first of about 40 times in 6 years of running the Met team with my guys and with Brian on every mission and other canines and other handlers. If she had not been biting a gunman that was pulling a Russian Torkurov semi-automatic pistol out of his waistband on the ground while under bite duress from this dog on his calf very aggressively, and the other gunman that was this bad guy's partner is pulling a Taurus Judge, one of those 44 mag, 410 shotgun compatible monster revolvers that Brian had to handle hands on, and I had to take the Phoebe bite. If she had not been biting that one suspect, I would have been taking fire at about 4 feet.
Right.
And the 2 riflemen running up behind me would have been taking fire as well. And I would have had no choice but to engage this guy with my pistol at contact distance.
Right.
And, we've been in too many gunfights already doing this job, and we've narrowly avoided about 40 other gunfights because of the dogs. And it's never a good day when you have to have a gunfight to get home safe. It's not good for the suspects. It's definitely not good for the officers. So these dogs, especially Phoebe and Champ and all the dogs that have followed since and that are doing great work on the team as we speak, brother, they save lives every day. They save suspect lives. They save officer lives, because the guy's going to have a dog bite on his arm, shoulder, or leg, and it might be cut up. He might need stitches. He's going to be sore for a long time, but he's going to be alive and he's going to go home. Right, wrong, or indifferent. And we're not going to have to fire a shot. And certainly if we can get out of the woods without having to go through an officer-involved shooting investigation and all the things that go with that, you never want that to happen. We avoid it at all costs, but we got to be ready for it if it does have to happen to save lives.
Phoebe was an amazing piece of this program, based off of what you wrote in the book about her and what you're telling me now. How long did it take to train Phoebe to get to a point where you felt really trusting of the dog to go do what you had hoped it could do?
I can speak generally to that. Brian has the exact answer as far as days or months, but it was 2 years, give or take.
Okay. Gotcha.
And it's not because she couldn't have picked it up quicker, Jay. It was because she was going into an outdoor environment that dual purpose canines hadn't really worked before. So she had to learn trail signs. She had to be able to pick up and smell marijuana. She had to smell the scent of what growers smell like, living out there for so many months, eating a certain diet. She could actually detect growers based on smell with that amazing nose of hers, sometimes miles before we get to a grow site.
Wow.
But how does she sort out when to engage, when not to engage? How does she deploy effectively when there's manzanita in the way and there's coyote brush and maybe there's a big cliff here or it's across a creek? It's just a very, it's like hunting big bucks in timber. Or in snow country or in cliff country for big muleys. It's just arduous terrain. And how do you effectively navigate around that? Not only as a hunter, but now she's got to hunt an armed gunman that's running around and wants to do harm to her. So there was a lot of trial and errors. She missed bites. She did the same thing that I described Champ doing in the later chapters. She wasn't quite confident enough to know that, I need to engage now, or I need not to hesitate, because he's real close to pulling that gun and he's going to shoot me, or he's going to shoot my handler, or, any of my other brothers. Cause Phoebe made it a point to, go eye to eye contact with every operator every morning in a briefing, rub up against our thigh, get pets, look us in the eye. And that was her way of saying, I smell you. I know you. I'm yours. I've got you. She was that kind of dog. No exaggeration. She never bit an officer by mistake in the chaos. And you can imagine, Jay, in these sites, when we got all these guys in camo and face paint and tactical gear, you can't even tell who your partner is some days.
No, there's no way.
When you get all that brush and, and marijuana and things go Western and maybe there's gunfire, there's a chase. There's a stabbing, you know, the canines deployed.
Mhm.
She never bit an officer by mistake in her entire career,
That's
which is
incredible.
phenomenal.
Right.
That's a miracle given the environment she worked in for
Yep.
so many years.
And all that chaos to think that she could, I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard enough for the officers to sort that out. Like, is that my partner right over there that I thought was there? Is that a bad guy now?
Yeah.
Just sorting through all the terrain and the thick brush. Amazing that she could do all that.
You know, and then we think about it is right. And then we think about like our labs, you know, our waterfowl dogs. You know, I'm a lab guy. I always had a lab as a companion dog, a patrol dog, and Apollo. You know, my she's retired with me. She's 11 now, and you know she's still moving around but getting older.
Yep.
I remember when Apollo was a 4-month-old pup, and Phoebe was Phoebe was probably a 3-year-old, 4-year-old veteran. And it was before Met was formed. And this is a little side story that's funny. And because I know all the dog people will love it. She was staying at my house in Morgan Hill, California. Brian and Phoebe were staying overnight because we were going to help the Santa Clara Sheriff's Office on a marijuana eradication team mission the next day. We weren't our formalized Met, but I was starting to bring Brian down to help our sheriffs with Phoebe and Brian, because Shasta was so effective. And we kind of wanted to show other agencies, hey, you guys can get some dogs and we'll help and you'll be a force multiplier. And Phoebe typically, Jay, is one of these super social. I mean, you wouldn't even know she's a bite dog when she's not working. Belly scratches, tongue hanging out, rubbing up on you, loving, just like all our
Right.
Labradors and our
Yep.
bird dogs do. But I remember we had a couple of knuckle bones from the butcher and we were going to give a treat since Phoebe was coming to town. So I gave a knuckle bone to my pup and we gave a knuckle bone to Phoebe. So Phoebe took her knuckle bone, spit it out on my kitchen floor, went over to my new lab, little Apollo, a little English lab, looking at Phoebe like a little friend with a knuckle bone. And Phoebe bit Apollo right on the nose, just snapped at her. And she dropped the knuckle bone and Brian went ballistic. Meathead, what, you're a guest in this house, you don't bite another dog. Got the little spanking and slept in the canine unit all night.
Wow.
Right. Meanwhile, my little dog Apollo, she wasn't injured. Phoebe barely hit her nose,
Right.
but it was kind of it was a dominate, you know, it was that dominance,
Sure.
you know, stance. But so for the rest of the night, we're going, hey, wait a minute, man. Phoebe doesn't have a bone anymore because she got disciplined and the bone got taken away. Where's Apollo's bone? Well, my pup was so smart. She had taken the bone and buried it under her dog bed, then jumped back on her dog bed and was leaning on the edge like, if that big nasty dog comes in, that dog is not getting my dog bone. And she was just a little tiny 3-month-old pup, brother. And it's the funniest story to this day. And oh man, this again, I'll get choked up. But I remember when Brian called me. I think it was July or August. I go into the book in the chapter when it happened, but he called me to tell me that he had to put Phoebe down.
Yeah.
And it was in the middle of our Met season. And he was up in Northern California. I was in the Silicon Valley. I'd give anything to have been with him. So we could have talked about it in person. And I remember he said, yeah, I had to put her down. And then he was just speechless, you know? And I said, all right, how you holding up? How's your wife and kids? Cause she was a family dog too. I said, you know, brother, I'll never forget that time. You know, Phoebe came to our house and bit Apollo on the nose over dog bones. And we laughed together and then we cried together.
Absolutely.
And then at that point, I just said, I'm going to miss her, man. But man, she had a long life. She will be sorely missed. And yeah, the team took it as hard as Brian did. It was, they're so much part of us. They're just like another operator on the team. I mean, it's not even a dog. It's just a partner. And she was that special soul. And she gives us a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement and a lot of motivation to all these new dogs that we bring on. And Brian's leading the charge of getting that training going. And we're really lucky to have had that experience.
Yeah. What a great case study. But yeah, they're a reflection of our own personalities, and a piece of that animal dies with you when they die. And it's but yeah, the memories are just so great once you just in remembrance of the animal. It's really a piece of that whole puzzle that I mean, can you imagine how things would have been without a dog of that special caliber?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing it up, brother. I haven't talked about Phoebe in a while. You know, she's always lingering there, and it's bittersweet, but
Yep.
it's great to talk about her. I always feel good when we do.
Yep.
I know my teammates appreciate you bringing that up, and I'm sure they're going to be watching and listening to this podcast.
Cool.
And
Cool.
I will remind them when I get to see them again when I'm back on the West Coast.
It stuck out in the book. You know, it was something that was unique, special, and very important. You could tell. I don't know, and you expressed that, but there was even more meaning there. You could tell that this was something that it was unique. So thought we should at least go there for a little bit.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So as this realization unfolded that we've got a major problem that's destroying ecology all over the place. It's not just the drugs, it's what it's doing to our environment. You had to start forming special forces. It sounds like you were involved in some very critical aspects of that, including a sniper team, right? You developed some of the sniper units. Could you kind of explain how that came together, why it was part of the organization, and how it played out in some of the real life scenarios?
Yeah, it developed out of a need, and we were very fortunate that most of the guys on the team had either prior military or some tactical experience on other law enforcement agencies, SWAT teams, things like that, either before becoming game wardens or integrating with those teams as game wardens. And there was a need for it, which I'll get into in a minute, but I got to talk about the personalities of all those codename guys that you read about in Hidden War. Frog, was a 20-year veteran of the SEAL teams and was a 9-year active sniper on the SEAL teams. And a good friend of mine now running the whole cannabis enforcement program. He's our assistant chief in California. And something that was cool about Frog was he got out of the SEAL teams and retired from Department of Justice, working firearms, narcotics, things like that, to be a game warden and do outdoor stuff and kind of take a slower pace, if you will, in law
Yep.
enforcement.
Right.
And then when I called him to say, hey, I get to handpick guys to do a pilot program, and this might turn into a full-time team, I'll never forget the response on the phone was, damn, man, I never thought I'd operate and push a rifle like that again. I'm going to give this a shot. I'm in. I said, well, thank you. Because your experience and your knowledge and, on the teams, especially with everything you did as a SEAL and as an LE guy, invaluable. So having him, Marcos, who's codenamed in the book, Shang, all the guys, they all brought an element because behind the scenes, Jay, I was already a basic and advanced sniper instructor with a cadre of instructors in the Bay Area with the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
Marcos and I, when we were patrol wardens together way back in 2001, before we had ever gotten a grow, we paid and built our own sniper rifles. We got a real good invite to go to the Santa Clara County Sheriff's first basic sniper school. Again, things that our colleagues in the game warden ranks would be like, what the hell are you guys trying to be? What are you doing?
Right.
We just kind of did it on.
It's not something that most game wardens would be like, hey, we got snipers now.
Well, why? Are these guys going to go rogue? Do they have to get? Do we have to like isolate these guys? But yeah, so we were doing this all on our own time and dime, and when we were on vacation, and we were going to SWAT schools, and we were going to MP5 operator schools, and we were going to tactical man tracking, hunting down, armed felons that you got to track, and you might be attacked trying to find them, because at the time, it was skill sets that weren't only exciting and interesting to us and very challenging to perform at that level and have those skill sets. I knew in the back of my mind, someday down the road, I didn't know exactly when, and I didn't know that it was going to be marijuana related or cartel related. We were going to need those skill sets as game wardens because of the changing lens of the world after 9/11.
Yeah.
When 9/11 happened, we literally had either just completed or we were about to just start our first sniper school as game wardens, with those same guys that were our Met allies that you read about in both books from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, SPAG, Apache, Rails, Snake. All those guys were the sniper team from Santa Clara. And
Gotcha. Okay.
they're lifelong friends. And so not only did we get included in their schools, I got invited to be a co-instructor. I'm a lifelong hand loader, long range shooter. I've been, one of those ballistic nerds forever.
Yep.
Outside of hunting, I'm into the long range thing. So it was just fun for me. It wasn't work. And I was starting to slowly open up spots, free spots through our sniper schools in Santa Clara County that the sheriff's office was putting on, because I'm instructing now, so I could bring a couple guys in, and I would get Shang, I would get Marcos, and they could come out on their own time, or they could come out with department sanctioning and go to a school. So by the time we formed Met, we already had people certified in all these skill sets. It was just kind of plug and play. But the reason we built the sniper team within Met was, on these outdoor missions especially, we had these areas where, had we had long gun coverage with optics, we could put a team, a designated marksman, a sniper observer team, up on an overwatch in some, not all grows, but in some grows, and we could watch the trails. We could know where the campsite was. We could see, quote unquote, suspect movement, grower movement, as our guys are coming in, being that eye in the sky. Yep. Where you're making more observations to get your guys in safely without ever having to fire a shot. And then we started getting used for fugitive recovery from other agencies. We started to get used for, anything terrorist related, or, having to do night ops where, with a good sniper scope and a good MBG system on your scope. And we had good tools. We were running the latest and greatest in MBG systems, and the Met team and the sniper unit Delta team, the name of the sniper team, we had to have the equipment to go out unsupported anywhere in California for up to 5 to 7 days. Wow. So when we have Mount Whitney at 14,000 feet, and we did some missions in the Eastern Sierras that I haven't talked about yet, that a spoiler alert, in the second edition of Hidden War that's about to drop, because the first edition's gone, we're going to add a couple of chapters. We're going to talk about COVID especially, and what's happening on that front since COVID, because it's really graphic and dynamic, and people need to know. And I'm going to go into some high altitude missions with our snipers that I want to share. We had to go anywhere in California, whether we were on the ocean, on the beach, we were in the hot deserts of Southern California, the deciduous redwood fern forest of the North Coast, or, we deployed literally at 13,000 feet, 12,000 feet at times.
Wow.
On some missions. That's how diverse that crazy state is. So we were finally at the point, man, when we got the funding and we were a full-time team, to have the right MBGs, to have the right compact weapon systems, the helicopter support, all the gadgets. And, when you look at the SEALs or Delta or mainline military forces, or any domestic SWAT team near you, near me, and you look at the equipment they need to do now, they need to have to do the job safely. It's kind of exponentially harder for the game wardens too, because we're going to be out in the bush and unsupported. Yeah. So a lot of good high-end overnight gear, survival gear, layers for snow country. We had to get all of that to do the job and be out there doing what we do. And that's why we put a sniper team together, and we're sanctioned to do so. Yep. And it's an integral part now of Met still. And, you're not just a sniper, you're a sniper within the Met team. So you're always an operator and an entry guy to do anything Met needs, but you might be one of the 5 or 6 long riflemen. And then canines are the same way. We have 2 canine handlers, sometimes more come to the party, so to speak. But overall, those canine guys are always team guys working with their dog where they need to work, because we're not a big team. And I wish we were bigger, and we're lucky to have what we have, but we are definitely still too small to diversify like some big agencies in the military can.
Yep. Gotcha. Has there been progress in taking this out? I mean, from where you started and what you identified as, I don't know exactly where all this began, but from where it began to where it is today, has progress been made at shutting down some of these cartels?
Some progress has, yeah. Have we got it all? No, by no means. But when you look at the stats that I think are in the letter jacket of the book cover, and I get into the stats of when we started to finally document accurately, what we were taking out on each mission, how many missions, how many grows we were finding. When we had a dedicated team and could do it our way, and when I say do it our way, Jay, I'm talking about not only the arrest and eradication phase and taking out that tainted weed so it doesn't make it into the black market and hurt people, but also the reclamation, environmental restoration phase. Once we identified, and we're getting about 44% of all the grow sites are getting reclamated the day of the mission. That stat may have changed. That was toward the end of 2019. But when you look at one team dedicated to this and not having to do all the field patrol work we used to do when we were assigned to a district, and then kind of do an ad hoc with the sheriffs and go rate a grow and bust a couple, but you're not documenting anything. You don't know how many tons of trash were taken out. You don't know how much water was taken, or diverted, how many guns were seized, how many bad guys were arrested. We started doing really solid, spreadsheets on all of that. And I kept those files and, for our administration. And it was mind blowing in the first year, the numbers that we were putting up, just our team. And that was a fraction of the problem, because there were other federal teams that were still out there doing it too, that we weren't statting at all. So when I look at those numbers compared to the old days, we're definitely making a dent. We're definitely getting a lot more than 5% of the grows out there. Are we getting all of them? No. Like I said, are we getting a good percentage of them? Yes, I believe we are. COVID was a little different. When COVID dropped, and I know when we were starting with your assistance making it possible, when we started the Thin Green Line podcast, COVID was just in its infancy.
Yep.
We were just, lockdowns were starting. We were having those interviews. And I remember talking to my teammates back at home in California, and I'm up here in Montana, and they're hamstrung. They're like, we can't get together to train. We can't go do a raid right now. We have no idea what's going to come down from Cal OSHA and for exposure, because these cartel guys are crossing the border all the time, and they're in other states, and they're diversified as journeymen to do different crimes. I mean, who knows what exposure they've had to this new virus, when COVID was so fresh. So our Met team didn't get going really hot and heavy till like almost July.
Wow. Okay.
The cartels,
a lot of the gap there.
right?
On time.
So there was a short window right there, brother. I mean, July to September, October is about it for the rad season, when you're going to get it before it's already out of the woods and they've already harvested successfully and gotten away with it. So it's been told to me that 2020 was as ballistic and as crazy, with as many assault weapons, if not more so, than the pilot program in 2013 when we were brand new, proving the team. It was off the hook. And I'm going to say, just on sheer, just from the logistical hangups because of COVID, more tainted weed made it out of the woods this year or last year in 2020 than we were less effective in 2020 just because we got a late start.
Yep. Gotcha.
And so many teams never went in and did anything because they were tied up on, medical response and lockdowns and riots and protests in some of the Western states. It was just horrible stuff. But we're making a dent. We're definitely staying in the fight, and we're going to continue in other states, especially out where you're at, for these smaller agencies that are starting to see it on refuges and going, fortunately, it's not as blown up like it is in California on the West Coast, but how do we deal with this? Our thing is, when I talk to other states, I say, look, here's 3 years of mistakes we made.
Right.
Fail forward, man. Don't make the mistakes we made. We failed a lot, and we learned as much as we could.
How you learn, right?
And we by no means have it mastered, but and that's been a real beautiful part about phase 2 in retirement, and getting to know you through podcasts and going to conventions and talking and to conferences, that this is not a West Coast problem. It's a national problem, and it's a much bigger issue, like you said, than the public realizes.
Gotcha. When you're talking about the grow sites and how it's making its way into some, I guess the marijuana and stuff they use, and it's not legalized, and it's bad for you, whether you agree with marijuana use or not. The stuff that's coming out of these grow sites can't be all that good for you. And so if you look at the legalization of marijuana, is there a benefit to that? Does that help take out some of these illegal sites, and does it make it a higher quality marijuana? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a huge question, and it's a good question, and it's one that I wish I had a positive answer for. But what we've learned when certain states have regulated independently, while cannabis is still a scheduled drug on the federal scale, We haven't seen regulation work in any of the states effectively to stop the cartel black market of
Okay.
tainted cannabis. And I'll use California as an example because it's my home state. And it was kind of interesting that from the time we formed MET in 2013 till the time I retired in December of 2018, in 2016, what happened during that election? We legalized recreational marijuana in California,
Yep.
and we tightened up the medicinal marijuana laws under Prop 64 and some other bills in California as well. And all the naysayers, even within our own agency, said, okay, I guess you special forces MET guys are out of a job. And I said, I don't think we're going to be out of a job. In fact, I think we're going to need triple the team in a year. And people thought I was crazy.
Right.
Well, what ended up happening was, and I talk about this at the end of Hidden War because we had some time to see Prop 64 in effect for 2 years. And that was probably, I mean, I'm not going to say it's the action exciting chapter of the book, but it's probably the most relevant from the standpoint of looking at environmental protection from a cannabis standpoint moving forward for the whole nation, regardless of where you sit on the spectrum. Prop 64 created a heightened black market because it lessened the criminality for trespass growers, i.e. the cartel. So it took it from a felony to a misdemeanor. And if you were a juvenile cartel grower, which there are a lot of juveniles in there under an apprenticeship, if they're good, under a good grow boss, if you will, it was a misdemeanor. It became an infraction. So a lot of agencies said, wait a minute, it's a flipping misdemeanor and we're going to go risk getting in gunfights and getting into
Right.
violence with these guys.
For a misdemeanor, it doesn't make any
For a
sense.
misdemeanor and it's legal in other places, we're out. So when you look at that last gunfight chapter I talk about in Hidden War, the Sierra Azul Part 2 that's over on the Santa Cruz County side, that grow site was a fortress. It was set with AK-47s, sawed-off shotguns, handguns, military type ammo, fortified positions where their camp was. They had it so lined up, just like the same situation we encountered when my partner was shot in 2005. We're very confident that it was the same organization, but they just moved over to Santa Cruz County because that county sheriffs and all those agencies said, we're not touching trespass cartel marijuana. We're going to go bother the mom and pop registered growers and we're going to go home safe. And that was a travesty because now they were working with impunity, just running amok, and very comfortable doing so. And that was the backlash because everybody could get very potent, high THC percentage content marijuana from the cartels in the black market for about a quarter of the price of dispensary, legitimized, organically tested cannabis, because the legal cannabis growers now were paying so much for permits, so much for inspection. I mean, there was a give and take in that process. So, and it hasn't gotten any better in California. And long-windedly to answer your question, people ask me all the time, if we federally legalized and regulated it with some sort of purity standard like the tobacco or wine industry, would that help? And logically, yes, it would. It would, because you'd have this cannabis available to users that want to use it. You'd have a purity standard to it where you don't have all the toxics and the issues we have with the cartels. And you would significantly limit, if not eliminate, and maybe not completely eliminate, but really put a big dent in this black market of tainted weed from the cartels and all the environmental damage that goes with it. So that's been the big talk with the new administration now in Washington of, is cannabis going to be analyzed and be regulated federally? And some say it might, and it might be a good thing. And I'm not saying that because I'm not a cannabis user myself. I'm not making a judgment either way. I'm looking at it from a realist standpoint, Jay, of being an outdoorsman and a conservationist and a diehard hunter like all of our listeners. I don't want to run across this stuff. And I definitely don't want my hunting buddies and their families and any of our deer hunters that listen to your podcast taking their kids out for that first deer hunt and stumbling on a cartel grow, because that happens on the West Coast all the time with first time hunting.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not a cannabis user either. I could care less about it. But from the story you're telling and the infrastructure that's behind the illegal part of this compared to the infrastructure that's behind the legal part of this, seems like we need more legal to get rid of all, to make it clean.
We do.
Not just in the marijuana itself, but in the cleanliness of how it's produced.
Yes.
That's the piece that is really affecting me and my love of the outdoors and everything that I believe about hunting and everything that goes with it. That's the part that I'm like, yeah, let's legalize this thing.
Amen. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, that I could care less about using it, but boy, I sure care about how it's made.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I just look at this thing and I have a lot of legitimate growers in California that are friends and are passionate about the environment, you know, and I mean, they're moved to tears when I do a PowerPoint presentation on stuff from Hidden War that's in the book, some of those same pictures. And they're seeing these dead animals and they're seeing these poisons in these Molotov cocktail water pits with the poisons in them and booby traps. And, you know, and they're seeing the heinous dead wildlife. I got mountain lions, I got black bears, I got bear cubs, I got gray fox just laid out, frothy mouth that have died within minutes of ingesting just a couple of drops of this crap. And they're so moved, you know, environmentally, they're crying at these
Yeah,
seminars. And I'm like, okay, you know what, then let's get out of judging cannabis or users or growers. Let's look at this thing as an environmental thing that we can unify on. And when some grower groups up in Northern California started terming our Met team their Earth Warriors, I thought, okay, that's different. I'll take it.
right,
You know, and
right,
where we used to meet them in handcuffs, they're coming up and giving us hugs and handshakes.
right.
They're not as intimidated. You know, when we're on the same battlefront from the trespass grow problem, that was one thing that we got to see, that other cannabis enforcement teams that do have to inspect the legitimate, quasi-legitimate growers, that some may be in violation, some may not be, and they're still finding violations. So they still have that, you know, there's still that abrasive relationship. But we were able to, you know, kind of skirt that, Switzerland, if you will, and kind of walk the line on both sides. And really, that's what it gets down to, man. You said it best. What you care about as a hunter and an outdoorsman, what are we trying to protect out there, and what, you know, what safety levels do our public have to have guaranteed before they feel safe enough to go try a new sport like being a new hunter,
Right. Yep.
you know?
So where do we go from here? I mean, what are the challenges that you're facing beyond this? You did a great thing in writing the book, which then you got into Joe Rogan, you know, one of the biggest podcaster on the planet. You were able to get on his show, explain what's going on, and talk about the book. You're part of Warden's Watch now with Wayne Saunders, and started the Thin Green Line podcast as well. Can you kind of tell about the journey you've been on to promote the concepts behind this, and where this should go from here?
Yeah, that's a good one too. Education and outreach, getting the message out as far and as wide as I can. I think that the fact that when you look at the title of the book we're talking about today, Hidden War, and I remember being at the NRA annual meeting, my first one I'd ever been able to attend in Indianapolis
Yep.
last year. Colonel Oliver North, who, you know, was a guest on our Thin Green Line
Yep.
podcast fairly recently, he was still the president of NRA then. And the cool thing about Colonel North was he took the time and was gracious enough to do the digital review copy of Hidden War before it dropped. And with his experience, military and political and everything else he's done, and being a big conservationist himself as a hunter, even he was blown away by the level of damage environmentally these cartels were doing. And he was really impressed with the fact that there was a game warden team specializing in it, and that other game wardens, while they may not have a, you know, quasi marijuana enforcement team, but they were still dealing with that in other states. He said, I had no idea the depth of this at all after everything I did with the counter drug issue.
Right.
He said, so here I am watching game wardens do this in America. This message needs to get out, and we need to have this book out at NRA annual and get this and promote it. And that was the start of making me realize that if someone like Lieutenant Colonel retired Oliver North is getting so alarmed by this and doesn't see the depth of it until he reads the book, that was an eye opener. That tells me that 10 years of doing 15 years of special operations, one book in 2010, 2020 or 2019, out comes Hidden War. And I'm still getting people at book signings going, dang, Lieutenant, this is crazy. I had no idea this was happening in our country. I got to read this. I got to give this book to so-and-so and so. And I said, that's exactly, ma'am, sir, exactly why we named it Hidden War. And this thing's been on national, international television. We've done numerous high-level investigative, press stories on it, from CNN to Fox to ABC, NBC during the time I was on the team. Second book is thankfully to guys like Joe Rogan and yourself and the outreach capability I've really been blessed to have since retirement, Hidden War's really gone everywhere. It's a bestseller and on Amazon, and the Audible's doing really well for everybody that can't read right now because they're doing stuff in their houses or they're driving.
Right.
But people are still shocked by it. I'm still getting feedback every day, Jay. Like, I had no idea. I had no idea. What can I do? What do I need to be aware of? What safety measures do I need to take? So we need to keep pushing the message continuously. It's a tireless thing we got to do. We definitely need to support our enforcement guys, regardless of what agency they're working in, but especially our conservation agencies that are dealing with this problem, because they are ultimately going to be the ones that are not only going to, try to take the public safety threat out of circulation, meaning the armed cartel grower, and then a toxically tainted marijuana plant that we don't want to see into the black market and hurt our public, but do the reclamation and restoration of these grows, take back the waterways, stabilize the banks, take out the trash. Because I go into this in the book, and I was able to sit in on a very high level, what they call a plaza boss. And for our listeners to understand, a plaza boss is an upper level cartel operative that is responsible in a particular region of a state or a region of the country for 50 to 100 grow sites, let's say. And that's their plaza. And we were debriefing him because he was taken in on another narcotic charge. But he was very candid in his interview to basically validate things we sort of suspected or sort of knew, but we didn't have anybody on that side of the fence to really validate it for us. And what really got some of these agencies, Jay, believing in reclamation and cleanup is when this plaza boss is telling me, yeah, we're starting to see some of these grow sites you guys get, and then we go back in to try to put a water system in the next year and use the same site because we know how overworked and we're basically going to outproduce you. We're going to put so many grows out there that you're going to get lucky if you get 50% of them. You can't get to them all. But we go into these grow sites and it's all cleaned up. 3 miles of water pipe we had to do a diversion on. The dam is taken out. It's grasses are growing. And I asked this guy, I go, well, are you going to put another grow site there? He goes, no. Why would we? You've already rated it, so we know it's on law enforcement's radar somewhere. And now you've taken out $20,000 to $40,000 of infrastructure that we put into place, and we're going to have to risk putting all that back in there. And when they dedicate a pair of growers to a grow site, what our listeners have to understand is these aren't just random farmers. These are guys that are vetted, super good at growing cannabis, super good at diverting water on gravity-fed water systems and hiding it. I mean, I admire them. I have nothing but respect for these farmers. They are amazing, and how well they do it in arduous, steep, rugged, dry, hot conditions. But he said, I'm not going to put 2 of my tier 1 growers and all that money and infrastructure for one that you guys will likely check eventually because it's already been in your system.
Right.
Light bulb went off. And we started to prove that to the other agencies because we would go in and, like now in the winter and early spring, brother, we would go in and scout these grow sites that were rated a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before that we reclamated, no activity. But if we hit one big one in a traditional, what we call a historical grow area, and we couldn't reclamate it, and that stuff was left out there, or another agency did a raid and didn't reclamate, it could be back as early as the next season, and definitely by the season after that, within 2 years,
Right.
Almost 100% of the time. So that's the message too that I got to keep promoting and pushing, that, yeah, we can throw bodies at this problem, but those bodies have to be committed to nationwide reclamation. And I've been asked to be part of an advisory board member for a new nonprofit foundation called Cannabis Removal on Public Lands, CROP for short. And what they're doing is they're bridging the gap nationally of bringing funds and education in for primarily reclamation and education to offset the cost of that we just don't have resources for, especially in some of these smaller states that have the problem and just don't have money for it.
Yep. Gotcha. Fascinating stuff. Just the book is a great read. I'm so glad that you're putting it together and getting the word out there. I think, you put down the rifle and you pick up the pen, and I think you're more dangerous to the cartels now than you were when you were raiding sites, because you're doing such a good job getting the word out. So you are not a cartel's friend right now at all. So
No, I don't want to be their friend. That's for
no,
sure.
I don't either,
You
you
know?
know, and
And,
it's what,
and I got to thank you, man, for being part of that thin green line to help, you know. I'd only say this as a friend and as a fellow podcaster, but, um, every one of us that love our outdoors, our wildlife, waterways, and wild lands are part of that fight. They're part of the hidden war
right,
fight.
right.
They really are.
Yep.
And it's part of that thin green line we talk about on the Thin Green Line podcast. Game wardens are so small, and Wayne and I were just talking about this 3 hours ago on our podcast. Man, we're a needle in a stack of needles as far as numbers go. There are so little of us out there that if it wasn't for hunters and anglers and passionate environmentalists, there's no way we'd find this stuff. And you know, poaching cases or grow sites.
Right.
Jay, I mean, our CalTip turned in a poacher program in California. When I retired, 70% of all the calls we were getting on that program, they weren't traditional poaching violations. They were grow reports. A hunter
Gotcha.
found one, or
Right.
this guy on his property diverted water, or I was hunting with my son for his first A-zone deer tag and we stumbled into a water line. And, you know, so that's really what it's going to take. And we're going to keep pushing it. It looks like federally now there's a big notice of this, because one thing about the hidden war promotion and the message is I was able to go national and get out of the West Coast when I retired. And before COVID dropped, you know, COVID, we talked about again this with Barry Kirsch today. It was really weird to go from being on the road, pushing the message at book signings and conferences and speaking engagements and teaching things with other agencies and conservation groups, that we're all, you know, passionate about, to go into Zoom, you know, just come to a screeching halt, not getting on the road. And kind of a blessing in disguise. You know, I was suffering from some burnout. I wasn't around. I mean, had just relocated to Montana, built the dream house on family property. And I might've been here 30 days in 2019, maybe. It's one of those things that you start losing it, you know?
Yep.
And like our Met guys on the team, I make an analogy to how hard they have to work during the grow season and how hard they train out of the grow season and scouting. And I look at how few they are. And we just need more people aware and more people fighting it and taking it as a national priority, like some of these other, you know, political priorities we see out there.
Yep. Gotcha. Well, let's talk about some hunting. I know,
Yes.
you know,
Love it.
I could talk about your book all day long. There's so much to talk about, but yeah, let's talk about some deer hunting. I mean, as an outdoorsman as well, yes, you spend a lot of time in the field doing your job, being a warden, but you also enjoy the outdoors as an outdoorsman. And your wall tells all kinds of stories just looking at it behind you. So let's talk about some deer hunting and some hunting that you do. What does hunting mean to you as an individual, not just as a warden?
Man, hunting is life. Hunting is spirit. Hunting is hope. Hunting is light. Hunting is strength and confidence. And I'm throwing all those words out because, you know, I think hunting is grounding, it's centering as well. And I know for me, I mean, obviously I grew up as a hunter and I was inspired to be a game warden because of it. But I remember when I got into doing the job, I was in my early 20s. And I remember for it was honestly 8 or 9 years before I harvested another deer since I was a kid.
Wow.
Because I was putting so much effort into being the best game warden I could be and hunting criminals, the two-legged animals, you know, that are really bad guys.
Right.
And I got to a point where I was turning down offers, you know, invites to hunt and go on out-of-state hunts. I'd never been out of California and hunted out of state yet and any of that. Just because I didn't want to break away from my district. I wanted to embed in those first 2 or 3 years in Southern California. And when I got back to Northern California in 1995, I met a lot of people that I had not worked with before in the conservation area, informants, ranchers, landowners. And I started hunting wild hogs again really hard. And I started hunting black-tailed deer, you know. I had taken just a couple of small black-tailed deer with my ex-father-in-law before he passed. He was one of my mentors and my hand loading coach when I was 15. But I never harvested a mature blacktail until I was over 30 years old. And then, you know, I was so bit by the bug that I was getting closer to spend more time in Montana. And man, like I got two really, really beautiful bucks on this beautiful wall of conservation memories for our family. But timber whitetail in the Yak wilderness in this part of Montana in the cold are by far the toughest deer that I've ever hunted throughout the country. And I've taken a Coues deer in New Mexico, which was a fantastic hunt, blacktail, the Sitka blacktail on a great Kodiak Island hunt with some game warden buddies of mine. But it took me forever to put in the time and the patience and get lucky enough to harvest a really close up, dense wooded habitat timber whitetail.
They're
And
tough. They're tough to hunt.
yeah.
Yep.
And I was so, I was so late in hunting to get to them. And this one 5 point behind me, I remember, I'll tell you some family secrets here, but my dad, before he passed, my uncle Steve, who's still here and was my main mentor. And I want to thank him on the podcast because I call him the woods ghost.
Yep.
He's the guy that was, nobody stalks more silent. Nobody sees more big animals. Nobody gets into so much predator chaos, mountain lions, moose, wolves up here, sometimes wolverines, whatever, than him, because nature talks to him. He's just in tune.
Yeah.
And he disappears in there. He floats. So I actually learned the stalking tactics and the patience that made me a good sniper and really made me a good game warden to sneak on people that needed to be snuck on, so to speak, from him. And I pounded the woods with him for years and years. And I shot some smaller bucks up here, some 120s and 110-inch deer. But our timber whitetail up here, like you guys back east, we get some 250-pound monsters up here. And
right.
We get some, these things are Goliaths. And coming from California and being a blacktail deer hunter early and seeing these guys in the rut, you want to talk about an adrenaline dump. Right. I have less adrenaline dump during gunfights with cartel guys than I do seeing a buck like that in the rut. And I'm shaking like buck fever. Like, I don't think I can make this shot.
Right.
Right. He's snorting at me. He's blowing. His rack looks like a freaking chandelier. His shoulders are just girthy like I've never seen. Now this thing looks like a Thule elk in California. But I remember finally getting to the point where I told my uncle, I said, you know what? As a sniper, we want to be in a hide. We want to be able to sneak into a hide. We want to be able to get into an environment of whatever we're trying to observe or whatever target we're going after, disappear in that environment, and be completely proactive where we have the element of surprise. We have the advantage of cover, concealment, noise discipline, and we're going to surprise you. And he said, well, you can do that, but it's really cold. So the tree stand thing is going to be really tough. The ground blind thing, maybe a little better because maybe you put a heater and you're going to be in dense timber. You're going to have to hike this stuff in places, blah, blah, blah. And it was just one of those things where I finally said, hey, we have a little bit of private property access where we can put a stand in. No one's doing that up here.
Right.
I'm going to try it. So 2005 and 2005, Jay, was, man, that was a pivotal year because that was the year we had our first gunfight that my partner was shot and almost killed.
Yep.
So I was already kind of whipped up about all that. And that was August 5th. And then I came up in 2005 in late October to Montana. And I spent the whole month here. The first time I spent an entire month here at my now home county diving in because I really needed to process and get past and think about where we were going to go career-wise. There was some heavy stuff going on mentally after that shootout.
Right. Sure.
With the new cartel element. It was, I couldn't get it out of my head. So I said, I want to immerse.
I can imagine why not. That's some powerful imagery that you just put in your brain, and there's no way that's coming out anytime soon.
Just crazy life-changing stuff. And, there was a lot of questioning things we were going to do and where we were going to move. And I said, I want to go and I want to hunt Montana for the whitetail deer season. If I draw a non-resident tag, make it count. And I'm going to stay out there until I either freeze to death and get frostbite and hypothermia and they pull me off as a frozen corpse, or until I get a big buck. And
That's some dedication right there.
Oh man, it was crazy. It was crazy. So I literally, my uncle and I found a spot that we had been looking at. We had done our research. We had watched, everything from drop horns in the spring, the temperate zone, where the big dominant bucks were moving through in the general areas where they lived in this one spot, where there was good migration trails, where there was not a lot of traffic, and where there were not a lot of logging or timber roads very close. So the likelihood of me running into people in this area was slim to none. And I found the right tree, and he said, okay, you're going to do this. And I had a single seat climber stand.
Yep.
And I set it up, and I would, hump into that thing every morning. It was about an hour and a half hike to get into position under a headlamp.
But dedication.
It was crazy, and I'm a California kid, and I'm in, a foot of snow, but I'm going to do it.
Right.
But I was excited, man. It was like a Met mission on steroids, and I was alone out there. And, I came from a state where I had never been in a situation where, when I'm in, climbing that hill in the morning to get to my stand, and I turn off my headlamp for a minute and I just look around and listen before first light. I mean, it was not only intimidating, it was just breathtaking. It was just motivating to no end. And then I'd turn the headlamp back on, and I'd see this, the crystal-like glow of fresh snowfall.
Yeah.
As it starts to crystallize and freeze and harden when the powder stops. And I said, this is like a wonderland, man. It's like a movie set. I can't believe I'm going to be hunting and the big buck's going to walk through in this stuff. So I get to my climber stand, and I had a video camera. I had a whole high 8mm back in the day, old school.
Yep.
And I was starting to do ad hoc filming and trying to capture my hunts, especially because I was hunting alone so much. And this was the spot. So the first day, I have this about a 120 inch 5-point, beautiful body on him. I'd see him every third day on his rotation, and he'd walk 50 yards to my right. He'd do a big circle, and there was some natural, I don't know if it was clover or grasses or something under, the pine needles that he liked, but there must've been some minerals, something was going on. And he would do this full semicircle and then come in. And it just tells me how smart these deer are. When you've put a tree stand in an area that's a pretty small tree stand, but they know every little nook and cranny of their habitat, right? And he'd kind of see the stand and stare me down. But I wasn't moving. I had a face mask on, and I was completely camouflaged. And he would just look, and then he'd look down and he'd look up. He'd stamp a little bit,
Yep.
But he'd continue to feed. And I mean, I was so close to this buck, man. The little beep to activate the video camera would startle him when he come up.
That's
And
close.
and I had never videotaped bucks before doing that. So my heart is racing. I'm like, this is great. If I don't see another thing today, this made my day. And then I spent 2 full days, sun up to sundown, in that stand, and realized that this was a first light to about a noon thing.
Yep.
And then it stopped.
Yep.
So then I could change, fill and flow with what you learn with your recon. And now I'm doing till noon, and then I'm going back in, and I'm going into the family house. And there's my dad, my uncle. What'd you see today? And so, like NFL film review, like coaches, let's review some tape. So I put the tape in the machine, and and I, no exaggeration, I filmed 43 animals that were either bull elk, cow elk, or legal bucks to shoot before I shot him.
Wow.
And so, I was having snowstorms happen during some of this. It was rut. So I'm watching these does push through, and these big monsters come in behind,
Yep.
pushing the ass on that doe. And I'd heard the stories from my uncles. When you're in it, you'll know it. It'll blow your mind. Well, now I'm in it. They're oblivious to me in the stand. They're running 20 yards in front of me in a blizzard downpour. And I'm just videotaping them. And I'm bringing these tapes home, brother. And I'm putting the tapes in. I'm thinking, okay, that's not as big as my uncle's biggest one. So I'm going to pass on that one. I'm going to pass on that one. I'm going to pass on that one. And my uncles are watching this tape, and they're going, dummy, why are you filming? Why aren't you shooting? I could,
Right.
Well, that's just a nice 5-point. It's like a 140. He's like, that's a monster timber buck, man. Look at the mat. Did you see the LJ, get out? What? No. Re-education camp. You need to be reprogrammed,
Yeah.
So I was filming some great stuff, Jay. It was magical. So on the 8th day of that ordeal, and I filmed 43 animals, a lot were much smaller than that big one I'm talking about, but I had 2 or 3 keepers I should have shot. No exaggeration. But on the 8th day, windy day, snow had stopped. I had some snow on the ground. Blue skies kind of opened up. The tree stand was rocking a little bit. Just that neat feeling. I had done my last rattle sequence of the morning, my rattle and my grunt. It was about 11 o'clock. And I think I was getting a little impatient on day 8. And I was kind of tired and I was kind of wrung out because I'd been 8 days straight. So I said, okay, I'm not going to sit till noon. I'm going to rattle at 11. If nothing comes in by 11:30, I'll give it that 30 minutes. I'm out. And sure enough, at 11:25, I still cheated. I just started to get up and I had rattled 25 minutes before and I just heard that beating thump, and 80 yards above me, here he comes. Just boom, 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 coming in hot in the rut, like another buck was in his territory. And he squared up behind a big spruce tree uphill from me at about 80 yards. And there's his ass end and there's his left main beam sticking out. And I'm watching him through my rifle scope and he's a monster. And my heart just starts racing. And I'm getting that buck fever in my scope. I have a Swarovski 3-10 on my Model 70, my 270, a 140 grade Accubon hand load. That's just that lights out rifle. And I'm going, oh man, all right, I got to calm down before he steps out. I can't believe I'm buck fevering out. I mean, I've hunted for years.
Right.
And he stepped out just enough. He looked back toward the stand. And just as he turned his head, he gave me that shoulder shot. And I got him. And when I walked up on him, I lost my freaking mind. And I have a videotape still where I set it up and did a narration and thanked my uncle and my dad and went through the whole process of how many days and just rambled.
Yeah.
But that by far was the rite of passage. And I can't tell you how freaking excited I was to get home and show my dad and all my uncles up here, because they're all veteran hunters and they've shot some beautiful animals up here and really pounded these woods, you know, in our November rut hunt in the deep timber. And it was just a rite of passage. You know, it's like I wanted to impress my mentors. And I came home and my uncle Steve, typical, you know, man of very few words, you know, if he's going to be a ninja ghost in the woods, he's pretty soft spoken. He just kind of walked to the truck and it's, you know, pull down the tailgate and I'm all, what do you think? He just goes, no, you finally made it into the Benoit Club. And I went, what? He goes, yeah, we have a Benoit Club. Didn't your dad say you can be part of the Benoit Club when you get a real mature over 4 or 5 year old 5-point? And that's Western count. That's not Eastern count. That's a 10-point with guards. I'm like, oh, all right. So I'm in the club. He's like, good job, LJ. That
nice.
And then he grinned and just said, I helped you put that stand in. And I was wondering, we've had a bet here in the family, how many days you were going to go before you took a day off.
Right.
And just said, I need to rest. And Jay, you know, I was learning those whitetail behaviors where, you know, that within that 5 to 7 day period, that dominant buck in the area, I knew he wasn't shot. He was going to come back through there, but I didn't want to miss it.
Right.
You know, I just didn't want to miss it. And I never had to hunt that way in the West ever. Blacktail, you hunt them open field, spot and stock, and they're roaming.
Right. It's
just so different. And it's fun. It's great. It's still challenging, but man, that was really cool. And then, that was the standout buck story. And then in 2007, in a whole different area that I put a ground blind in, and this is the other big one that you can't see, I think, in this because he's on the other side of the wall and the camera's not picking him up. But that one was freaky. I put a ground blind in and I'd hunted it constantly for 2 days, and we had it just a little too low elevation, so we were seeing the edges, you know, just the bellies and just getting some of the main beams, some of the dominant ones coming in the rut and working does. You would never really get a shot. So I, again, talking with my uncle, we had kind of found this area like the 2005 spot. And I said, you know, I think we got to push this thing up higher. He goes, okay, let's do it. He goes, I know there's a bedding area up there, but we don't want to push the bedding area too hard.
Yep.
But we can get on the fringes. And we ended up finding a magical spot up on this meadow that peaked out, and it had 3 pressure ridges that all came down on it. And I looked at it, and I always think, not only as a hunter, but as a hunter of bad men too, I look at tactical layouts, and I, you know, from grow experiences, from doing grow ops especially, you know where these guys are going to set up, especially if they need a tactical advantage.
Yep.
And it's no different for hunting and with animals. I you know, kind of play with that same type of mindset. And so I found this spot and, you know, 4 massive spruce in the middle to hide the blind. I said, we both looked at each other and that's it. And we moved that ground blind, set it up, descended it. And I just got out of there. I wanted the area to cool off. And I went up there 2 days later and I crawled into the blind at first light. And something I do if I have the room in a ground blind is I'll bring a journal.
Yep.
And when there's a lull in the activity, I'll journal some thoughts, I'll journal some whatever. In fact, I wrote the introduction to War in the Woods, my first book, on a little mini laptop lap writer in that very blind. A couple years after in 2009. But in 2007, that first morning I crawled into that blind. I hadn't been in there. It was barely hunting light. I didn't even have my rifle really set up. I didn't have my rattle kit out yet. I was just getting my stuff put away, and I just heard, and this monster, man, he's coming on that pressure ridge off my oblique angle to my left, coming in from the west, and he's bombing down the main trail, which is I was just off of because it was atop of a pressure ridge, the dominant boy, big boy for the area. And he like literally put his front hooves into the ground and skid when he noticed that the ground blind in his peripheral vision was 15 yards to his right. It was so unusual for him. That's how blows my mind, brother, how much these deer are aware, these mature bucks. And he halted, and then he turned 90 degrees and looked at the blind. And I didn't even have that window opened up to make a shot. I had a little peephole where the three zippers came together. And I went, oh shit, this is not good. I can't get the rifle out. And I'm peeking through the hole, and he's stomping, blowing, snot's coming out of his nose. I see eye guards about 6 inches tall. They're spiked and forked, in the really dark horned, just a beast. And he's challenging the ground blind. I'm like, okay, I better get something going here. So I'm slowly trying to unzip that one zipper. I'm pulling my 270 up. I'm creeping it up. I get the barrel out the side of the blind, and that startles him. He jumps up, does a 180 in the air, lands, goes 5 more yards, and I think he's history. And then he decides he's not done. So he stops and turns around again. And now he's only like 20 yards away, and he starts stamping again. And I did a scope cut on my eye on this because I blew it, but I came up and just brought that gun in so tight to try to get a shot, because that's the side of the door. That's the side of the window that my seat was closest to. And got a brisket shot on him, and he just dropped. It was like an 18-yard shot. And the videotape came out, and as I was getting the videotape ready to debrief it, I feel all this wet on my forehead. And and I turned the camera screen around, and oh crap, scope cut right here. And just a magnificent buck. I think I sent you the picture of both those bucks, actually. So it's
like your tattoo, right? Scope
it's
tattoo.
A tattoo. I love it.
Rite of passage.
I can still feel the cut right here under the eyebrow. It's all good. But those were two, and I've hunted all over the world now and had some amazing hunts. The mountain goat on glaciers above Valdez, Alaska. That was a bucket list hunt, but nothing was as challenging of trying to, I'm not going to say we've mastered it up here, but know what to do, where to spend most of your time, where not to waste time. And now we just have a blast. And it's one of those things where if I don't harvest a deer for 3 years, I'm okay with that. We have CWD tags, and we have doe tags we can get for our meat buck or our meat animals. And I just like having the opportunity to be out. And the best thing is no coverage for this thing.
Right.
Those locations.
Right. That is nice.
And it's something Barry talked about on today's podcast to get away from the rock and roll world, man, is get in his tree stand, and that thing doesn't work. And I'm telling you, brother, I can't tell you how centering and grounding, not having, just being detached from technology is. And I just, I almost get anxiety wishing I had more of it.
Right.
With the way our worlds are as they become. But those two bucks by far, I would say, are those are the most special hunting experiences from the big buck standpoint ever. And I haven't told those stories in a long ass time. So thanks.
Beautiful. Save them for the big buck registry. I like it. But it is interesting to think, that you took some of your professional strategies of tactical advantages. Like, where is the tactical advantage of the perpetrator here? And he applied it. This is where the buck would be or where they're probably watching me from right now, or where this is the area where they are going to have the best vantage point to survive. And applying that to deer hunting. That's crazy, but a great observation. It's exactly how to go about, your approach to the hunt. And if you can figure that out when that dawns on you, when you've got that moment like, yep, that's how it has to be approached, man, the whole world changes in the deer woods. You're like,
Doesn't it
okay,
though?
it
Yeah.
really does. Like, understand their vantage points, what they need to do to escape and survive,
Yep.
and where they can watch for anything coming their way. And you're right. I think these big mature whitetails, whether it's a doe or a buck, it's like they have Google Maps
Right.
built into their
Embedded.
brain.
Embedded.
Yeah, embedded in it, like it's to that walking viewpoint, that the virtual tour that Google can do
Yeah.
for you. They
Yeah.
have
I
that
like
in
it.
their
Virtual
brain.
tour. Yeah.
And the minute that there is something out of place that wasn't there yesterday
Yeah.
or 10 years ago,
It's crazy.
that's new. They
Yep.
know. They understand change, and boy, do they react to change. And I've seen this, and just in like deer yards in New Hampshire, where the snow
Right.
gets steep, and they observe, and you can. It's funny. They will. You can be on it. Like, I stayed at this snowmobile cabin one year, and we were on the deck. We were having some adult beverages, and just kind of chit chatting, and the deer would come walking through the yard, and it was no big deal. But the minute you stop talking, boom, gone. They understand change. So if you just carried upon your day, or if you decided to get off the deck and go down a level, they were gone. But if you were just kind of out there doing your thing, like you weren't paying attention and you didn't pause the moment at all, then they were okay. But the minute
Yeah.
anything was off to them, something went from nothing to something, or from something to nothing, that's a change to them. So,
Right.
you gotta start to understand, well, how do they process information? That's a good way to approach it too. It's a tactical advantage that you have as a human with, opposing thumbs, compared to what a whitetail does, who's all off of instinct and
Yeah.
just years and years of learning how to beat the predator.
And that's it. You hit it on the head, Jay, when you say to beat the predator, and they're the experts at it. And one of the things I noticed, they're the ones that have the control out there. They move silently. They know their environment, right? Like you said, they notice change immediately, almost peripherally, almost like subconsciously.
Right.
So, and I just knew that in snow conditions, when the ground's that cold, and even in powder snow, just the noise you make to get close enough to get a shot in that dense timber, you just can't get a big buck that way sometimes.
Right.
I mean, my uncle told me many stories of where he literally almost lost feet a couple times to get some of the monsters that are on his wall, where off came the boots, he kept a wool sock on, and he's trudging in icy snow for a couple of hours to go 30 freaking yards.
Right.
I mean, he's doing like a Carlos Hathcock Marine sniper scenario.
Right.
And there's that big buck with a big deadfall. He can just see his main beam and part of an ear, and he's bedded there because he's got the best place. You can't sneak up on him. And I go, well, I could try that. And I've tried it. And you just got to get lucky if you're ever going to get that shot. But I got to lessen my frailties as a human being in their environment. I got to get in a spot where I can be silent and quiet and let them come to me. Because
Yes.
I don't, these timber whitetail up here, when the ground conditions are a certain way, just because it's so choked up, as good luck. Good luck. I had, codename Marcos, my good friend and lifelong hunting buddy and game warden partner I met, and a fellow sniper. He was up here hunting with a non-resident CWD tag with me just November of last year. And, we harvested one buck while he was here. And he had a couple opportunities, and they were very fleeting, very short, and he sat with me in a stand, and we did a little ground blind stuff, and we did a lot of spot and stock. He goes, man, we've sat for days on sniper ops and on med ops, and I'm used to that. He goes, but up here in this cold, it's just hard to sit for that long.
Right.
But he goes, I see why you do it and why you have to do it. And he's hooked. So, now he just has to punch that tag and just have that magical experience. But, I think that's the only, and honestly, my family thought I was pretty crazy doing what I was doing. And now they're like, oh, you setting up your stands yet? You got your cameras out? What's going on? And, we kind of compare notes, and it's an unorthodox way to do it. but it's a way that just keeps me connected,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And you guys are the masters of doing tree stand hunting back East. It was something I never did in California. And I just love it. It's that whole, like we said, you know, in tactics, we call it an LPOP, listening post observation post, high ground to monitor movement. In snipers, we call it primary hide or an alternate hide. Final firing position, FFP, you know, for all those law enforcement military acronyms. But you're right, it's the same way in hunting. And that's why you see so many military veterans and law enforcement guys, even outside of being game wardens, really enjoying hunting, especially after their careers and really diving on it. And I'm seeing a lot of, you know, people in my line of work retiring to this part of the country because they can get out and kind of learn for the first time.
Right.
You know, you can
Right.
teach an
Yeah,
old
that
dog.
makes sense. I can see
Yeah,
that now. Yeah, that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
You can teach an old dog new tricks, right?
Right.
We're always learning. You know, I love still being able to learn. And as frustrating as it is, and I get burned 9 times out of 10 with these bucks up here, at least I got to see one and tell the frustrating story. You know, it's pretty cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. So let me hit you with 10 rapid fire questions just to kind of sum this up here.
All right, love it.
What's your number one hunting tip of all time?
Patience.
That's a very good one.
Yep, be patient.
Sometimes we have these things that we feel like we might be unlucky if we don't have this item with us, or you leave it in the truck, you leave it at home accidentally, and you're in the woods and you're like, I can't believe I forgot my blank. What's that one thing for you?
Oh man. Can't believe I forgot my rattle. Yeah. My rattle.
Yep.
Yep. My Nights and Hail rattle box. Yep.
Yep. That's a good one. What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
Not feeling as effective every day that I want to feel effective.
Okay.
It's with myself. It's not getting enough done in a day, or not being productive enough in a day, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm my own worst barometer on that. I have way too high expectations, even in phase 2. My family gets on me, you know, but yeah, I just think there's so much life to be lived, so to speak, in every day. And I try to make every day count. I don't always punch that clock, so to speak.
Right. Gotcha. So how old are you today, John?
52 as of November 21st last year. So 52 is the change.
Yeah. All right. So knowing and going through everything you've gone through in life now, if you could speak to the 25-year-old John Norris, what would you tell him?
Oh, that's a great freaking question. And it's an easy one to answer. I would say, enjoy the moment more often, be in the moment more often. Don't think too far ahead of what you got to do tomorrow or next month or next year. Savor the case you're making, savor the hunting experience you're making. Give yourself extra time on the books to spend with quality people, whether they're family, whether they're friends, great hunting buddies, you know, great friends on podcasts, whatever the case may be. Savor the moment, because my biggest thing is my motivation level is sometimes a hindrance, Jay. And I've never told this personally to anybody. I'm glad you're bringing it out. Is I always know 5 things I need to be doing that haven't got done yet. Right. It's just the way it is. And to be effective in our careers and try to be the best you can. I've missed some things, you know, I've missed some things. And then I get to a point now where I look back on my career and I go, man, that was a great hunt, or that was a great operation. And I wish we had spent another day. Yeah. You know, just hanging out with the team. Or I wish I had spent 2 more days in Montana when I could have been, but I felt I had to get back and teach this class, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Yeah. Savor the moment and make time for those special relationships, because nothing's more important than that. Yep. That's a great answer. Nothing's more important than that. Yep. I completely agree. You're at a convention somewhere, either a hunting convention or some kind of convention with law enforcement, and you strike up a conversation with a stranger in the hotel lobby, and they ask you what you do for a living. What do you tell them now? I say, you know, I just quote my brand. I say I'm a proponent of the thin green line. And then they ask me that question, what's the thin green line? What does that flag mean on your car or whatever? Right. And I go, you got a minute? And we have a conversation. Yep. And I say, I'm everything about protecting public safety in America. I'm everything about protecting and propagating and promoting conservation and love for the outdoors, whether you hunt or fish or not. And I'm definitely a patriot of fighting for the beautiful things we have in this great nation of ours and not taking them for granted, and trying to educate everybody on how important it is not to take those things for granted.
I feel like you've had this actual conversation with
I
somebody
haven't,
already.
man.
No,
I don't.
interesting.
You know what, Jay? Other than Mike Ritland, I haven't had any Q&A.
Gotcha.
Mic drop. Yeah.
All right. All right.
Yeah. This is fantastic.
What did you have for breakfast today?
A banana.
Banana. Okay.
Been
All right,
just
very
a banana. I've had 2 back-to-back podcasts, so but I'm looking forward to a big lunch.
good. All right. Gotcha. All right. You get your own billboard on the side of a highway. It's blank
Yeah.
canvas. You put anything you want on it. What does it say?
Oh man. I don't know. It'd be something thin green line.
Yep.
It would be something to do with the thin green line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would too. I mean, that's such an important message that you're
Yeah.
relaying on. It's bigger than just the book. Like there's some
It's so much
serious,
bigger.
so
Yeah.
much bigger.
Yeah. And I think, you know, and again, I'm going to give you a shout out because you've helped me even outside of the podcast promote the thin green line with my brand, with your expertise. And even my brands in firearms with recoil, let's say, or, you know, product sponsors for the Thin Green Line film series. There's so much more than just playing with good toys and going out and hunting animals.
Right.
I mean, there's such a bigger message to the Thin Green Line, and I think it goes so much deeper into American values that are so delicate right now,
Right.
and they're so vulnerable,
Yep.
for lack of a better word. So yeah, it would say Thin Green Line, and it might have underneath that fill and flow.
Okay.
And fill and flow, for the listeners that don't know, you're going to see this in Hidden War if you get a copy or an Audible or whatever. Fill and flow was our team motto for the marijuana enforcement team, to say that the world is so crazy. Missions, no matter how well you plan them, are going to go sideways. We're never going to freak out. We're going to fill and flow with whatever's given to us, right?
Yeah.
And in COVID, in the change of the world and the polarization politically that we have, I think fill and flow is just, it has a ring to it of a little bit of acceptance, a little bit of tolerance, a little bit of adaptability, and not being so rigid in our judgment of ourselves and others. And at the same time, always overcoming adversity and not, not failing and getting out of the fight any earlier than you have to.
Right. Yeah, I like that. That's the fill and flow. I'm going to adopt that one for myself. If I say the word successful to you, who's the first person that pops into your head and why?
Oh man. Wow. I'm kind of blanking on that. I think my mom.
That's a great answer. Moms are so successful.
And the
Probably
reason
not given enough credit.
No, she doesn't. And, you know, there's a story about her. She was, we lost her at 47 years old back in 93. So she passed very young. I had just graduated the Fish and Wildlife Academy. And even though, you know, she had a hard situation health-wise and growing up, she gave us so much. She gave us so many tools out of a very small toolbox. Myself and my siblings, I'm the oldest of 4. My mom called us the wolf pack. I was alpha, obviously being the oldest, and I did a lot of taking care of my young ones while she was working multiple jobs. But even though she had it hard, I look at what, not necessarily my career, but I look at my sister being a retired San Jose fire captain and the great work she did. My brother being a brilliant electrician. And I mean, he helped build the Levi Stadium, the 49ers new stadium in Santa Clara. He ran that project, just amazing. And my youngest brother, who's a film and video editor and documentary filmmaker and stuff like that. I think she'd be super proud. And I think she was super successful because it could have went a lot different for all of us, Jay, to be honest.
Right.
And I hope she's aware. And I think she's hopefully seeing that all that hard work and sacrifice she put forth, man, it really paid off, because I'm really proud of my family, and I'm really
That's awesome.
I'm really proud of how everyone's developed.
That's great. That's a great answer. What's a day in your life look like?
They're very different.
Okay.
We're going to talk a day in phase 2, like now. Yeah. So, you know, today is kind of a typical day for the winter. We're not in the middle of hunting season, because if we were in the middle of whitetail season right now, I wouldn't even be home yet. But
right.
This is it, man. This is either hosting a podcast or being on a podcast. networking with more people that I do outreach with, scheduling training, scheduling teaching, doing a little bit of social media. I'm
Yep.
not a big social media fan, but I have to do some of it, given the brand and outreach and the role I've been blessed to have.
Yep.
And then it'll end up being, without a doubt, because I'll have the time today, and because it's not too cold. I think we're gonna have a high of 16 or 17 degrees today. I can bundle up safely with a face mask and I can do my trail run. So I'll get a run in,
Yep.
get a little PT, get a little cardio, even on the cold days, man, it's beautiful out there. I just got to go slower. I got to be smarter about, breathing in cold air, but
Sure.
I'll do a little bit of that. And then there will be a good meal by the end of the day to celebrate a good day. It's been
Nice.
a fantastic podcast with you, and a fantastic time having Barry Kirsch on our line earlier. Yeah.
All right. So here's question number 10. This is the last one. It's interesting. You said, well, if it was a deer hunting day, I wouldn't even be home yet.
Right.
The last question is, what's a typical deer hunting day in your life look like?
Oh man. Okay. Get up at 4-ish, out the door by 5, leaving the truck by no later than 6 a.m., knowing it's not going to get dark or get first light till close to 8. And any of the spots I hunt up here, let's say if it's a Montana hunt, I'm going to be hiking for an hour to hour and a half. And it's not necessarily a distance thing, but it's very cold. So don't sweat before you stop. Right. Yep. So I'm kind of thermal climbing as I'm climbing that hill to be really careful. And then I'm going to sit for at least 4, 5, 6 hours. And then I'm probably, if I haven't harvested something in one of my spots, I'm going to be doing I'm going to walk some spot and stock areas that have, good chance of something coming by, either on a migration trail or an integration of 2 canyons or something like that. And we're pretty much done by about 5 p.m. during the dead of deer season here in Montana. So
all right.
That would be it. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, one of these days, maybe I'll come out and join you. I've never been to Montana. It's always
Brother,
been a
you
dream
have
of
an
mine.
open invite. You come
Very
join
nice.
me and we'll have a heck of a fun hunt together. I would love
That would be amazing.
Yep.
Absolutely amazing.
Let's do it.
So, John, tell us where people can find you once we leave here today. I think, we're pushing 2.5 hours. Hopefully I'm giving Rogan a run for his money as far as.
Yeah, that's one of our longer ones, brother.
Yep.
It does not feel like it's been that long. That's
a good thing. Where can people find you? Where can they find more about the Hidden War, what's coming up for the Hidden War, and the podcast that you're involved with, and maybe other interviews that you might be on?
Yeah, we'll start with the book. The book's available on Amazon. Just go to Hidden War John Norris, and you'll find it on an Amazon search. It's available in hardcover, which has all those cool pictures in it. It's on Kindle and it's on Audible, like you mentioned, Jay, where I got to read and narrate it with a really good, actually Billboard artist producer and Audible book producer in Georgia. And the sound effects in there, as I'm sure you'll attest to, are pretty cool and original scored music, but it really sets a tone. You can find me on Instagram at John Norris, all one word, at JOHNNORES. Facebook is the same. My website that kind of encompasses everything, the books, my signature Trailblazer folding blade and series of blades, and the outreach I'm doing, other podcasts, is johnnorris.com, JOHNNORES.com. Thin Green, the 2 podcasts I do co-host with the help of you, grateful. With Lieutenant Wayne Saunders, also out of New Hampshire, where you're at, brother, is the Warden's Watch podcast, available on multiple platforms. And now new for 2020, we branched off to do a second podcast under the Warden's Watch umbrella called The Thin Green Line, which isn't limited to just game wardens and their stories. It's anything to do with conservation. So we've only had 12 episodes, but man, have we had a diversity of really cool, patriotic, conservation-oriented, outdoor, lovers of the outdoors, podcast guests. And we really encourage people to jump in. And today we actually had, a rock and roll drummer for the multi-platinum touring band Shinedown that have been together for 20 years. Their drummer, who happens to be a tree stand hunter, just like you and me, Jay.
That's great.
And and an outdoor cook like you wouldn't believe on an open fire. I mean, he is a culinary chef for wild game out there, second passion to music. So tune in for that one if you guys want to check another podcast out. We just had him on. And if you want, people ask me a lot of questions about how to become a game warden. I get a lot of kids that I love to mentor and help any way I can. Hidden War questions related to safety out there. If you're running across a grow, you can direct message me on Instagram or Facebook Messenger. You can also hit me on my website, which is, I'm not at my website, but my email directly, which is trailblazer413. That's trailblazer with a Z 413 at yahoo.com. And a lot of people ask about either personalized signature blade packs, Jay, or a personalized signed copy of Hidden War. Just email me or direct message me through any of my social media, and I will do shipping through Venmo and PayPal payments and put together very nice personalized packages if people want something more personal than getting an Amazon book.
Yep. Yeah, very good, John. And just real quick, and you mentioned this when your uncle said you've joined the club. You've mentioned Benoit. What does that mean?
It's, I don't know. It's an old like French term because we, you know, our name is French, and it's something my dad said like, oh, Louis Benoit. And I think it was a group of people up here that were way back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, that family, the Benoit family, that were notorious for being just those diehard successful hunters that got all the big bucks. So when my dad settled here and he was a lot younger, and then my uncle and my Keith and Steve, so my whole group of uncles and my father, they were kind of a wolf pack of hardcore hunters, man. They left the house and didn't stop hiking, you know, till dark. And their whole thing was, when I came up to do my first whitetail hunt with my dad about a year before I started as a fish and game officer, I was looking at mounts, or I was looking at drop horns, and he goes, okay, now this is a Benoit Club buck. I'm like, okay, a Benoit Club. This is a Benoit Club buck. Nothing smaller than this. And I went, all right. So that's, yeah, it just comes back to an old family that had that history and that.
That is interesting. And the
Isn't
reason I wonder about that is because in New Hampshire and in New England, there's the Benoit family.
Okay.
Some of the most notorious big whitetail hunters, tracking hunters.
There you go.
That the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
And not too long ago, called the best deer hunting family in America. And I've worked with Lane, who's since passed, but the family is getting older. But for quite a long time, they were very big, famous, skilled, beyond skilled deer hunters that all they had was their trackers, a rifle, the deep timber, a GPS, and go. Is basically how it went. So
wow.
yeah, I wonder if there's a connection there. That is very
interesting.
interesting.
I'm sure there's a connection, because my family has been so hardcore into whitetail and followed it countrywide. They could very well be referencing that family or an extension of that family.
That's what I'm wondering.
So,
Maybe there's a relative. Some plant landed in Montana, some landed in Vermont.
Yeah, because it's a revered connection. Yeah, revered name of respect, Jay, for sure. You know, like the Benoit Club, man. That you made the club, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah, yeah. If you make the Benoit Club in New Hampshire or New England, that's the same equivalent to what you're describing. That's very interesting.
Maybe someday I'll get to meet a real Benoit.
Yes. We'll make that happen sometime for sure.
Yeah. Awesome.
John, I really thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate you and everything you've done. All the moments you've spent in taking out bad guys and exposing this on a much larger scale than just keeping it contained within a department in California. This is huge. And I can't thank you enough for bringing this to light.
Thanks, brother. I really appreciate your help in bringing it to light. It's just been a blast to talk to you today. And thanks for all you're doing for us, for the Thin Green Line on so many other levels besides just this great big buck registry platform. Love your platform. Honored to be here, and I really appreciate the time today. Thanks for having me on.